Gillespie, is Ms. Bowman available?
Yes, sir.
I didn't know if she was going to be
She
present.
is. Ms. Bowman is on her way if she's not
Oh,
here in the
okay.
building.
All right.
She was expected to be here around 5 o'clock.
Okay.
But I had also told her that we were going to do the electronics for about 10 or 15 minutes after 5. So we have the, number one, the email accounts, and number two, the civic clerk that we were going to talk about first.
We do.
Okay.
So do we, is everyone done with email accounts? I don't know about Mr. Weaver and Mr. Quarles. Haven't seen them yet.
Yeah, we can hold that till later in the evening.
All right.
And we can do it outside of this meeting, too.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can start then with the proposed amendment, LDR 2023-03, on livestock and poultry.
Mr. Chair, so there were 2 items for technology. The first is related to the individual members' accounts
Yes,
for email.
yes.
The second is your member accounts for the civic clerk program. And so what we'd like to do, and I would like to hold for a minute, because I know I've spoken with Mr. Quarles and he expected to be here at 5. We can catch people back up if we need to, but I'd like to hold for a minute while I introduce what it is. So we've talked about this before, and you can see it. I think it's on the screen up here as well, right?
Mhm.
Yes, okay, very good. So this is a view inside the civic clerk portal. Just a reminder, civic is sort of a brand name like Coke, and everything that comes in under that large brand is the civic platform. And civic is also what runs the county's website. So when you look at Louisa County's website, it's been tried and tested across the country. There are many localities that use a civic branded website, which is good because you know where to go look for departments, you know where to look for boards and commissions, you know where to find staff directories and do frequently asked questions. But also, we can leverage a lot of the other communication tools they have, which include things like the e-blast or the news that comes out if there's a civic event, like sports events, but also if there's some sort of a weather emergency, people can get signed up to go onto an email blast and get that communication. So it does many things besides civic clerk, but we're going to talk about specifically civic clerk. So again, I know Mr. Quarles was planning to be here in the work session. Arrived yet. Before we start a video, just a kind of a quick little orientation. Number one, we have our Deputy Clerk to the Board of Supervisors, Alexandra Stanley, here this evening. You all, I think, know Alex. Alex does a fantastic job with doing all the board agenda, minutes, in preparation for presentations. And so she's helped a tremendous amount with getting Deborah Johnson oriented to be essentially the Assistant Secretary, if you will, to your commission. And so together, as Alex has been working with Civic to get the new system online, she's been helping Deborah as we move to the electronic world of getting all this information together. So you can kind of get a sense of these cards, the way they're laid out, and everything that we had been working in was not set up in a more graphic way. It was more of a lists and file directories, and it's become more graphic. So your packets are going to look more graphic when you get them and a little bit less kind of true to the PDF document the way it was created. So this is not the video itself, right? So we'll hit start on this and it'll run? Yep. Okay. And it's about a 5-minute video, is that right?
It's less than that.
A little less than 5 minutes?
Everyone, this is
He's in the building. So I would suggest we hold for him because in the 30 seconds it takes him to come here, he'd miss a little bit of this content. Okay, while we're doing that, I may ask,
You may. Go ahead.
Mr. Weaver,
Mr. Weaver.
if I may ask, Mr. Weaver, is your county email address the @louisa.org address?
I can't hear you.
Is your county email address the @louisa.org worked out, or do you need to speak with IT staff to make sure that you can get your email from cweaver@louisa.org?
Yes, so.
Okay. So we can do that. I think after we run this video, if they would just stay behind, Tom, if you'll just let them know, then we'll set that up. And Mr. Quarles, do you also need your email account help this evening?
I have the account. I'd like to button it up a little bit.
Okay, perfect. So we'll get.
That's okay with you.
Okay, absolutely. So if we can just take a tech break for about 3 to 5 minutes, I think it'll get them worked out, and then we'll have Mrs. Bowman, who, that's right, has arrived. So,
Very good.
okay. All right, well, let's do that. Let's run the video, and then we'll.
Can I just add?
Yes.
So with this is what the board portal will look like. With your email accounts that are set up, you will receive a link that you will click into that will allow you to access your board portal. I believe the link that might already be in your email account may have expired. So Deborah Johnson will have to get with you guys to get that all set up. But so that just kind of gives you an idea of once you get into that link, this is what it will look like to access the agenda and the packet. And Scott, you can go ahead and play it.
This is a quick overview of the Civic Clerk Board Portal. Every user will be provided with their own unique username and temporary password. I have already logged in, so I am on the agendas or the home page. Before we dive into the portal, we will go to the user menu in the top right-hand corner of the page. When you're logged in, your name will appear where my screen says System Admin. Under the user menu, there is an option for account settings. By clicking here, you will have the option to change your password at any time. Once we fill out the 3 fields, we can save our new password to secure our account. The next option on the user menu is Email Preferences. When this option is selected, we will be emailed when new agendas are published to the portal. We can get back to the Agendas page by clicking on the Agendas tab at the bottom of the page. Once you log into the site, this is the page you will see first. The agendas will show up as these cards and will be listed in chronological order with the most recent agenda first as they become available. To access an agenda, we are just going to click on the appropriate card. If we are at a meeting in progress, we will have the option to join the meeting by clicking on the Join Meeting button. Next, we can select if we are present and voting or if we are a present non-voting member. At the top of the page, we have the option to download a PDF version of the agenda or the full agenda packet. If we click on the agenda, we can see it will quickly download. On all PDFs opened in the board portal, we will have the option to annotate the document. If we click on Annotate, we can see various options appear. Here we can add arrows to point at information. We can also highlight or add text boxes. When we save these notes, they will be here next time we open this PDF document. My annotations are only saved to my account, so only I can see them. I'm going to exit out of this agenda so we can see other features available to us. Back on our agenda page, we can see all of the sections and items on the agenda for this meeting. We can find out more information about an item on the agenda by clicking on the name of the item. Once on the item page, we can see some basic information about the item at the top of the page, such as who created it, the department, and the recommended action. We also see an attachment list. If we were to click on any one of these attachments, they will open in the PDF annotator just like when we open the agenda. We can see if there are any speakers listed on the right. At the bottom of the page, we have a notes field. Here we can add any private notes. This field is helpful to add any comments or questions that you have regarding an item. If we add a quick note, we will see this page auto-saves as we add content, so no need to find and click Save. At any point, we can go back to the agenda by clicking on the Agenda Details button at the top. Another function available on this page is the flyout menu. By clicking on the 3 dots next to any section or item, we can see there are a few options for this item. Here we can see if there are any speakers listed. We can also see if there are any attachments on this item, or we can click on Review. By clicking on this option, we'll be brought back to the item details page. At the bottom of this page, you will see we can quickly navigate to the previous or next item. You also have the ability to star or favorite an item. This is useful to help remember particular items. If we go back to our agenda details page, we will see that item has been starred. If you do enter notes, you will have quick access to all of these notes by clicking on the Notes tab at the bottom of the page. We will then click on the agenda card to see all of the notes for that particular meeting. You can then click on the note to quickly jump to that item details page. That is all we have to cover in this video. If you have any questions, please reach out to one of your administrators for further assistance.
So thank you, and there'll be more as you begin to use this. I do have some good news, and the physical devices are not here for you to use, but we will be deploying a iPad for each of you, courtesy of Louisa County Public Schools. You're going to get a used iPad device, which is fantastic. So we've had a partnership for that kind of equipment from the schools before. With those iPads, you can do exactly what you saw on the screen, which is mark up and make notes. Just keep in mind, it's like a notepad. If you make a note, it belongs to the public. It's a record. So as much as it's useful for you to do your business is the people's business, and it's subject to FOIA inquiry. So that is it for the electronics. I would ask for about 3 to 5 minutes for the two commissioners to work on their email, if that's all right.
We will reconvene at 5:20.
Okay,
By
very
the
good.
clock behind you.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure. All right. There we go.
No aspect of this
I'm going to adjust the order here since we do have guests, and I apologize for keeping you all this long, but we're going to talk about water at Zion Crossroads first. Mr. Gillespie, did you have any introducing comments for this?
No, sir, other than it fits into the context of the growth areas that we have in the county, as well as more recent news that have come forth about investments that at the state level are being made in the water system and the clearance, of course. And then likely, I think we've reported here, I think I've reported that the Board of Supervisors of Louisa County did adopt a resolution that officially made the policy of the Board of Supervisors of Louisa County that there be a capacity limit that was the Board of Supervisors policy as well as the Board of the Water Authority. And so those are recent news events that have occurred. And then you have two guests that you had invited to come speak to you. So that's Ms. Pam Bowman from the Louisa County Water Authority and Steve Lucas, a recognized expert, but also who serves on the Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District Board as a director.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
I think Mrs. Bowman was going to speak first.
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Bowman, please come up, and I think one of the things we're trying to understand, at least I'm trying to understand, I think everybody feels roughly the same way, is really understand what's going on with the water and the wells at Zion Crossroads. When we have meetings, they're generally public hearings, and we usually have a very brief amount of time to hear from everyone. And we get a report, and I know for myself, I'm unclear as to what some of these reports really mean. So I wanted to have some time today to dig into this and really understand, what do the reports mean? What's the status of the wells and the water supply at Zion? And, what can we expect for the future? So please.
Okay, if it's okay with you, I'll give an overview, and then I'll be glad to entertain any questions. As Mr. Gillespie stated, the 75%, we would sell 75% of the capacity. The health department has a standard at 80% of capacity. When you sell that much capacity, you have to add capacity at that time. The Board of Supervisors and the Louisa County Water Authority Board talked about this in 2019, limiting that to 75%, which is a safety factor that they wanted to build in, but they never memorialized it until February, March of this year. So the Water Authority has memorialized that by resolution, and so has the Board of Supervisors. So that is fairly recent, but that is something that's done. We sell capacity, and we keep track of that on a quarterly basis. To date, as of the end of March 23, we've sold 42.9% of our capacity. Our current permitted capacity at the wells that are currently online, and that's 6 production wells, is 624,800 gallons. When we bring Spring Creek 1 and 2 wells online, that will provide us an additional, the indication from the health department is that we will have 204,800 gallons additional capacity available to us. Some of the original permit was 582,000 gallons of water, and some of the current, or some of the previous Virginia Department of Health standards have eased a bit. They build a lot of safety into the numbers that they provide you. We endeavored back in '22, at the beginning of the year, to set out a plan on how we could shore up, enhance, whatever the case was. And one of those items was to, Spring Creek 1 and 2 wells were drilled by Chuck Kincannon, who was the previous developer for Spring Creek. Those wells weren't needed at the time, and they just sat there idle. They are not on any of our monitoring wells that we're bringing online. These are actual production wells that were just never put into service. So we're bringing those 2 online. To date, we have all of the water line run to the well house, as well as all the conduit. What's left is to run the electric lines, pull the electric lines through the conduit, run the interior piping, and install a generator for backup in case of long-term power failure due to a storm or whatever the case is. We did send a draft agreement to purchase water from Fluvanna County, any excess capacity that they may have. We noticed that they were just dumping, they can't hold that in their tank but 14 days. So to turn their tank over, they're just dumping it on the ground. We said, don't do that. Let us buy that. We've not heard back from them, so we don't have an agreement with them. I just told you about the 75% capacity, memorializing that. We did a hydraulic analysis on our tank. Again, that's a 500,000 gallon tank. The health department only granted us originally 326,000 gallons of storage in a 500,000 gallon tank. Again, it's the safety factors that they build in. Once we did the analysis on the system, the hydraulic analysis, and we supplied those numbers to the health department, they accepted those numbers from our engineer, and they increased our granted capacity in that tank to 432,220 gallons. We did add a filtering system. We have one of our wells that's currently on the Brown property. It used to be the Poor property. Had some iron and manganese issues. We added a filtering system to that. We have had some startup problems with that, but we're working through those. I worked with the county attorney's office, Mr. Eldridge, to develop a water supply emergency plan. And when we presented this, everybody's concern was this is just if the wells get low, if we have a drought. It's not that. There's a terrorist attack, there's a waterborne illness that breaks out. I need the ability to shut things off for the protection of the public. A drought is something slower that will develop, and we will monitor and watch that. And I can come to the Board of Supervisors and ask permission to declare an emergency and instill restrictions on that. But things that happen quickly, if we have a major mechanical breakdown, a distribution line break, that we have to isolate and stuff, it could impact people's water. But our mission is to provide water for public health and safety, and then also to provide fire suppression for the protection of life and property. So we have sort of a dual role in that regard. Another thing we did is, as all of you are probably well aware, there are many supply chain issues going on. One of the things that we found is when we had a well pump go out, we were sometimes 3 months getting a well pump. So what we have done is we've brought in various well sizes into inventory. And so, as a matter of fact, we had a well pump go out, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before. And we had that well back up and online by Friday. So that saves a ton of time, and we'll reestablish that inventory moving forward. So those are some of the things we've done at Zion. I hope that that's not too much information at one time, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
So, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Goodwin, yeah.
Pam, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Is the policy still first come, first serve?
Yes, sir.
I have some concerns about that.
Okay.
Number one, maintaining the right balance between residential and commercial. If one gets out in front of the other significantly in any of the growth areas. And number two, how much are we reserving for the growth areas up and down 64? Do we have a figure that says, okay, at Shannon Hill, we want to maintain this much reserve capacity for that growth area and the other growth areas as well?
We don't have a pool or a number that reserves capacity for anybody. We have that first come, first served policy.
Don't
So,
you think we should? We can't promote growth areas if we're going to get rid of our capacity.
Well, we're at 40, did I say 42.9%?
But we don't know how much, there's a latent demand out there for whatever our plans are for the growth areas. If we take that up to 75 or whatever, with this first come, first serve, then our growth areas are just non-growth areas.
Until James River comes online, yes, sir.
Even then, we need to know what demand we want to set aside for each one of these growth areas so that
Is-
they remain viable.
Is that a policy you would like me to take to my board?
I'm not sure whether that's your board or whether that's the Board of Supervisors, but as a planner, and we're pushing growth areas, then we've got to start thinking about what is our idea of this growth area build out. I know that the policy is also we're not going to do residential, but we're going to get into mixed use.
Where do we not do residential?
I thought the county said some time ago that for public water, they did not want to support residential, that it was commercial only.
That's not been relayed to me. That makes wastewater incredibly hard to treat when you do that. You need the
Right.
organic loading to treat the wastewater.
Even more so. Somebody, I don't know who it is, needs to start an effort to say, how much capacity do we want to set aside so that these growth areas remain viable?
That's something we can.
And we don't get overbalanced with respect to residential and commercial.
We can definitely look at that.
Second question, if I may.
Sure.
System design on the James River project. Is the system designed based on the discharge allowance by DEQ or our projected demand on our end
Discharge the,
from James River? DEQ has told us how much we can take out, so if we design the pumping and the pipes based on what we can take out or what we think we're going to need?
I think right now, they have based it on a 4 million gallon a day withdrawal.
Okay,
I think the ultimate withdrawal is 12 million gallons a day.
okay. Again, once we know what we think our projected demand is, I would think we'd be designing the system based on that, and then at least we'd be able to go back to DEQ and say we need more. They may say no, but if they do say yes, and the whole system is designed for the lower figure,
Yeah, I think it's
We're in trouble.
expandable to the 12 million, but the county took the lead on all that construction and stuff. We did get the opportunity to
Right.
review, but the county took the lead on that.
then I'd like to work with staff to get back to the county on that to see, because once we lay all that pipe, put all those pumps in, and we decide we're short, we do have the option to go back to DEQ and ask for more. It might say no,
Right.
but if it say yes, so I mean, I know it's costly, but you do one or the other. You design based on the discharge that we're allowed, or you design based on the demand, but
It's my understanding that the ultimate permit is 12. I think that everything's being designed for 4 million. I know the plant is designed for treating 4 million gallons a day.
right,
In kind of retrospect, we're pumping at our highest rate right now at about 260,000 gallons a day.
right,
So there's still a lot of growth that would take place. And when I gave you the 4.2, that's since the inception of the Zion Crossroads system,
right.
which is 20-some years ago.
Yeah, that's why it's even more important that we get some handle on what we expect in the growth areas. And we plan for that.
The hydraulic analysis we did, and I think probably to do that would be a master plan. Going forward, the hydraulic analysis we did would be like a piece of that planning that we have. So that might be something that we need to consider moving forward so that we can plan for the development down 64-250 and
Right.
what that's going to look like.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you,
Ms.
Mr.
Bowman, I'm
Chairman.
going to follow up, just so I understand, because my understanding was the Water Authority was responsible for the project down, for the James River Water Project. You say the county has taken that over
They've
So-
taken the lead on the construction.
on the construction.
We
So
will operate it.
what part of the county, I mean, the county's a big thing, who under the county, what organization under the county is
I'm
responsible?
assuming that was economic development, or county administration,
County
that
adminis-
they
yeah.
took the lead on that.
Okay.
Quite a long time ago, yeah.
All right,
We will not operate the intake structure or the first, mile or two of pipe, or maybe it's 4 miles now, in the pump station. That will be run by the James River Water Authority. But we will evidently purchase water from the James River Water Authority, which we will treat at our Ferncliff plant, and that will go into the distribution system. Once the Shannon Hill section is built, it will go either there or to Zion Crossroad.
all right. Other questions? Okay, I have just a question or two, because I've been here long enough to have a good bit of history on water need at Zion Crossroads. I don't have all the history, but, and just to see the different things that have gone on, always with the promise we're getting water from the James River. And I know that's been a long, long-term effort with many problems. So in the meantime, we are removing water from wells in Green Springs. So one of the things that I hear and I see presented is discussions on stress tests and that sort of thing to determine the capacity of the wells. I'm not a hydrologist or a geologist or anything like that. I'm over on the electrical side, so I don't have a good way of understanding all of that other than just a practical understanding. But I was looking at the Dewberry report from 2021, and there's a chart in the back that showed the static levels in the wells from 2019 to 2022. This is all of the wells, apparently, and just from looking at it, it seems like, if I'm reading it right, they're all negative numbers, so they take, I'm thinking it's probably measured from the top of the well, and we're looking at the level a negative number of feet down, so that's why. It appears to me, if I read it and understand it correctly, that all of the wells are declining static level. Some a little bit, some a lot. Now, there may be a well or two that's fairly stable, but out of the 13 wells listed, it looks like there's a decline. The average decline given is somewhere, it looks like it was running from 31 feet in 2019 down to 52 feet in 2022 in October when they last reported that. I know it's older information, but when I see this, it looks to me like we're depleting water in the aquifers. I would kind of assume that. I mean, we do have refill from rain and that sort of thing. But help me understand, because I don't know exactly what it's trying to tell me. Help me understand what we think is going on with the wells in Green Springs and whether or not we've got any kind of projection for how long the water's going to last. Because I'm just, and I know we can drill other wells, but, you know, depending on what aquifer we're tapping into, I'm just, you know, I'm trying to understand.
What our geologist has told us is that these are sustainable wells for well into the future. And the infrastructure's been paid for by the citizens with tax dollars to bring these wells online. And our thought process is that we will continue to use them in an emergency standby mode if, say, we have to shut the intake down on the James River because a train derailed in Lynchburg. Then we can bring these wells online. We'll do the minimum testing to keep them current with the E. coli and the parameters that we need to know about. But we'll be able to bring them online in emergency capacity if we need to. The wells are declining. There's no getting around that, but they do recharge in the wintertime. But when you see a well level at 50 feet below the surface, it's a static well level is what it's called. Understand those wells are, I think the average well depth is 450 to 500 feet deep. So when you think you have an additional 500, 400 feet of storage underground of water, that's a lot of water. So the wells do decline in the summertime because we don't get precipitation. Anything we do get, the trees and vegetation on the surface absorb that before it gets into the aquifer. But in the wintertime, we see the wells recharge.
I guess what I don't understand from looking at the tabular information is that they may recover in the winter, but they're continually going down. I mean, from January 2019, the first well in column weld at minus 64.75 feet. October 22, minus 181.5 feet. And there was some variation in 2019 and 2020, but starting in 21, it's going down. And it does go down through the summer a tremendous amount, almost 100 feet, which was much more than it had done in 2019 and 2020. So I'm just looking across these. I don't see any of them recovering. There may be one or two, but in general, they're on the decline. And again, I think it's good that we're trying to get water from the James River, but I don't think anyone still knows when that may be. I know there's engineering and all that work going on and a lot of effort, but I don't know of anybody that's willing to tell me a date that they would print in the newspaper or bet money on or do anything like that. Maybe Mr. Barlow has a date in his back pocket, but I'm not going to call on him to say it. So my concern with the wells is not just for Green Springs, the folks that live there in Spring Creek and the businesses and that sort of thing. I'm looking broader at Green Springs Historic District, and my concern is for the agriculture on that side of it and whether the aquifers in the area are being depleted. So, and you know, maybe they are, maybe they're not. I don't know. I'm trying to understand enough information to make an intelligent decision on that kind of thing.
So the health department, when the wells were pump tested, the combination of all the wells pumped well over 1 million gallons a day. We were given about approximately half of that because the health department understands we're not the only ones that are using the water. We do have neighbors at Green Springs that use the water. So again, that's a safety factor that's built into that. I can tell you Spring Creek 1 and 2 that were drilled back in the early 2000s by the previous developer, Spring Creek, those pump tested, 48-hour pump tests were required as a public utility to do that, almost identical to what they did when they were drilled in 2000, early 2000s. So yes, there is a decline in the wells. That's happening. We're pumping water out of it daily. In the wintertime, we drop down to about 170,000 gallons a day. In the summertime, because of irrigation, it's up to 260, 270 a day typically. When it rains, we see that decline. When it doesn't rain, we see that go up. So the withdrawal from the wells.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're seeing a decline, but we're taking measures to ensure that we're being the best stewards of the asset that we can be.
Do we have any way of projecting how long, particularly with the things that are being approved, do we have any way of projecting, how many years would we go before we pump to zero, or at least pump down. There's a minimum level we don't want to go below, I'm sure, for sediment and that sort of thing, but.
Right, well, once we get to that 70%, when we've sold that, and sold that capacity, we won't sell anymore, and
But-
development won't happen.
I understand that, but since,
Right.
even at the current rate, since
Right.
we're seeing a decline, that means that at some point in the future, we're declined to the point where we can't pump them anymore.
Well,
So have we looked at what that is, what that time period is, or?
the only information I have in that regard is the geologist said that they're sustainable for into the future. He's not given me a, date that there will be no water left.
Okay,
But I don't, that's not gonna happen. At least not while I'm here. I'm gonna make sure that we, take care of the system as best we can.
hope you're gonna be here a long time.
No, sir.
Then-
No,
then-
sir.
Then you're not giving me a lot of confidence, but. All right, thank you. Anyone
Mr.
else?
Mr. Chair.
have any- Mr. Goodwin?
Following up on what I said earlier and some of the things you said. Phasing of James River and the pipeline serving the growth areas going down 64. What comes first, chicken or the egg?
The growth area
The pipeline that's supposed to go down 64,
to Ferncliff,
eventually all the way to Gum Spring.
Gum Springs, whoever comes in and pays a connection fee first.
We don't have a pipeline.
And then if they don't pay, they have to pay their connection fee to
Let
get
me,
their
let me
permit.
restate it, Pam,
Okay.
please. Let's say that I have a very desirable, lucrative business that wants to move into the business park at Shannon Hill. We've got nothing to support them right now. Shouldn't we be looking at that pipeline even with the existing, even if James River's not here yet, we've got capacity that could support that economic development, but we don't have a pipeline to serve them?
Yeah, I can't get water there if I don't have a pipeline.
Well, I know that, and that's my point. If we don't know the date when James River is going to come online, we could still be using that extra capacity between, I think you said 45 and 75, to support that business. If we were laying pipeline today, instead of waiting for the James River water.
Well, that depends on where we are with the capacity sold.
But you've told us that you've got capacity.
We do now, yes.
Right. So if I had a business approach the county tomorrow, wanting to move into that business park or the other industrial park or any of the other growth areas, we don't even have anything started to get the infrastructure to them.
My
at this time.
recommendation would be if we had something like that we drilled wells there, because the water would be way too old by the time it got to Shannon Hill. We just don't have the users on the pipeline. We would not be able to sustain the safety of that water. Yeah. And those are really large pipes that go down.
We're going to get to that, whether we have James River or not. We're always going to have a first one that comes in, and that first one won't take enough water. Maybe the second, maybe the third. So we're going to get them all to drill wells, and then later on require that they get on the water line?
That's what we've done. We did that at Ferncliff. We had Cavalier and Patriot Aluminum on a well at Ferncliff until the lines were installed, and then they had to pay to connect.
Okay.
Mr. Goodwin, I got one to go right along with that. Haven't we been asked to approve, didn't we approve earlier this year, money to build the water tower
Water tower
at Shannon Hill Business Park? What are we gonna put in it?
Nothing
What are we gonna
until
do
you
with
get
that?
pipes to put water in it.
Okay, I mean, I'm wondering, we built all the stuff down there. Seems odd. This is not a
Yeah, I
complaint to you or anything, yeah,
again, that's not, the county's taking the lead on that construction.
yeah. All right. All right, anyone else from Ms. Bowman? Yes,
I
Mr.
don't really
Jarvis,
have-
if you have a question.
Yeah, I don't specifically have a question. I just wanted to bring some stats just because over the last 2 weeks, we in the town of Mineral have been dealing with our water and stuff. Last 12 months,
There you go. Yeah, that helps them on the.
sorry, the last 12 months, the town of Mineral has actually bought almost 9 million gallons of water for our little community. We had at one time 5 wells. We only have 1 well now. Its static display is usually around 65 to 70 feet, but when it gets down to 30, we have to shut it off to recover it because the pumps start surging and stuff like that. And that could be quite a bit of time depending on the season, like Pam talked about. We're in the process of putting in 2 8-inch lines for our PUD that's being developed in the town of Mineral that will have 304 units. We have an 8-inch line coming in on First Avenue and one coming in on Fourth Avenue. Right now, we're just going to cap it until the developer starts doing his thing. In addition to the 304, we actually have 67 single or townhouse units that have various stages of being approved. So just in my little town, we're talking 370 residents, additional units. We're looking to drill at least 1 or 2 more wells ourselves, but that cost is scaring us because it's drinking water. That's just some stats as we were building, telling our residents, oh, by the way, we're going to raise your water rates, and here's why. That's why I know those numbers, not that I came prepared, but I've been in our little planning in the town of Mineral, and I was surprised that we bought that much water. I mean, when you look at it, we have, depending on whose census, about 455 people. 9 million in 12 months just seems like a lot of water to me, but, so.
Thank you.
That's a totally separate system from the wells.
We understand.
I'm gonna just bother the hell out of you tonight.
Fine.
There's always gonna be somebody at the end of the line. And that water's gonna be stagnant. I've seen them down there outside of Mineral, opening the hydrants and just letting it go. At what point, how many users, how many gallons per day do you need online before economical to put in a return line and a pump at the end that would keep it circulating? I mean, we already have 2 customers that could be pulling off of that, may not be economical, but at some point, it's going to be economical. What is that? What does that look like? Because I know once you dig the trench, laying 2 pipes is cheaper than digging another trench and putting another one in.
Yeah. The line has to turn over by VDH standards in 14 days. It's not safe after that because the chlorine residual is gone.
So number of gallons in the pipeline, how much needs to be drawn off to keep it moving?
We estimated at Ferncliff with Cavalier, Amazon, there's something else there, and we have a couple of customers coming down 250 now, that 350,000 gallons a day needs to go through there. And an engineer calculated that, I didn't, to make sure that the water is safe. So what we're currently doing is blowing off that system every day to make sure that those customers are getting a chlorine residual in their drinking safe water.
Okay.
It's not 380-some thousand that we are doing that because we have some customers along there, but it is water that's being wasted at this point. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, it just seems at some point there's a chip wire that says we ought to be putting in a return line and constantly circulating while people are, and at some point, the people that are drawing off of it will pay for that pump in that second line.
Yeah, but then the problem becomes, it's, you know, if it's 14 days old when it gets to the end of the line, it's gonna be coming back.
Well, it shouldn't be if you got that pump running all the time.
Well, but
Yeah.
even
Oh,
if it's not.
constantly circulating. That's why we build loops in our systems to
That's
keep
what
the
I'm
water
talking about.
constantly circulating.
Building a loop on this thing, as you extend it, you take the loop further down, so the water is constantly moving.
Right.
But I realize it's economics, you gotta have enough people pulling off of it to pay for running that pump and putting that second line in.
Right.
But we're always gonna be faced with this. Person on the end of the line is always gonna be faced with this.
Yeah.
Always.
When we had, and disinfection byproducts is another issue that we fixed with our nanofiltration at the system, but the water going into mineral was mineral in the far reaches of the town of Louisa, because they're the furthest parts
Right.
in our system. Those were the ones that the disinfection byproducts results were higher because the chlorine residual is just not there.
Right.
So, yeah, it's definitely an issue. Loops are wonderful in a system, we love them. But I don't know how you go that far unless you do it along the way to keep that water moving. The water will go whichever direction, wastewater doesn't. Wastewater goes in one direction, but water will go whichever direction the demand is calling for it. So, even if there is water in that line, down 250, it can be drawn back towards Zion Crossroads, because that's where the demand is right now. So, we do have to blow off some down there just to make sure that that water is fresh and has a good chlorine residual for those people down there.
Mr. Quarles?
Just for clarity, you have those loops in the current system now. And if there's any expansion, then there'll be more loops.
Yeah, all throughout Spring Creek, it's looped all around to keep the water moving.
Understand?
That's just a long stretch of single pipe down 250, 64,
Thank you.
Not on 64,
along that corridor.
no. Not on the 64 corridor at this point,
There's what?
loops.
No, there's no, that's what I said, not on that stretch of corridor, I'm sorry.
All right, then, thank you, Ms. Bowman. And if you could stick around for just a little while, we might have some more questions, but.
Okay, yep.
But thank you so much for that. We appreciate that deep dive. So, Mr. Lucas, I want to thank you for coming out. I thought a good counterpoint is just a view of what's going on in Green Springs that the community is seeing, because we often hear from you as well, and we never have time to have a conversation about what you present to us. So if you could tell us what Green Springs is seeing.
There we go. Thank you, gentlemen. Folks, I'm not a geologist or a hydraulic engineer or anything like that, but I do keep an eye on these things going on in the county, particularly the Green Springs. I'm on the Historic Green Springs Board, but I'm here today speaking as anybody but Steve Lucas. So you can ask me questions and I'll answer from any of the aspects that I can. And, we never know the worth of water until the well is dry. But what do you expect? We have an expectation, everybody at Spring Creek, everybody in Mineral, everybody in Louisa County, when they turn the tap on, they have the expectation that water is going to come out of that tap. And those of us that live in 200-year-old houses with a 23-foot deep hand-dug well and a jet pump, it's a lot of times that expectation doesn't happen. But Mrs. Ballman and the county have the expectation that they're going to provide that water when someone turns their tap on. But where does the water come from? And primarily, we're looking at the Green Springs area. That's where our focus is going to be. And I want to go back in the beginning. About 500 million years ago, the geologists tell us, that little kind of yellowish blob on the lower right-hand corner of the picture you see there, that is what we call the Green Springs Pluton. They tell us that magma broke out underground just a little bit south of where Shenandoah Crossing is now and pushed its way underneath the existing geology, which was metamorphized sedimentary rock, had been laid down over millions of years before. Kind of like this, you see the lactolith kind of in the right-hand middle side. So the magma never came to the surface. There are, if you go through the Ellisville area, you'll see a lot of what we call dikes. There is a Ellisville pluton. It's not as famous as the Green Springs pluton. You see a lot of just huge, big gray granite rocks right at the surface of the ground. Well, what we had here was that it all stayed underground. But it disformed, it heated, it broke up the rock that was there, then it cooled. Left us what we call the Green Springs pluton. And so, where does the water come from? So we've got the water, we've got the Green Springs pluton. This is the main well property. This is where the Spring Creek and the Green Springs wells are located. It's right where West Green Springs or East Green Springs Road and Route 15 cross. All that water gets pumped from there to Zion's Crossroads. And contrary to what you may have heard, the water does not come. It's not a giant flowing river underground. It's fractures. When the pluton cooled, and over the years it's been pushed and twisted and turned by geologic forces, which cracked it, which made fractures, made fissures in the rock. And some of them interconnect, some of them don't. Some of them go great distances, some of them go a short distance, but they're all down there. And our wells go into that rock. And over time, water seeps down through what they're calling a water table, seeps down into these series of fractures. They can be picked up by the well and pumped to, in our case, to Zion's Crossroads. But where does the water come from? Rain. If you want to notice, around the Green Springs pluton, the blue color is what's called the Mine Run Complex. It's old metamorphosed sedimentary rock, and the geologists tell us that some say that because of the hydraulic conductivity of the Green Springs and the Mine Run complexes, there's a little bit of movement from the surrounding area into the Green Springs pluton. The others say there is none. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a geologist, but there's a little bit of disagreement there. But what we do know is that not much water comes from outside the Green Springs pluton. So what falls on that pluton is what we wind up with in our water. And kind of a proof for that, this is a graph. The red lines are the precipitation between 2014 and 2020. The middle line is the average number of gallons that were pumped during that same period. And if you notice the line on the bottom, which was this is monitoring well number 2 deep. That's the number 2 well. It's a deep. There are deep and shallow wells. You may have seen those when you looked at your graph, John. And so the number 2 deep well follows almost exactly the precipitation. As precipitation went up, there's a lag time for the water to get from the surface down into the rock, into the fissures, and into the monitoring wells. But pretty much it follows right along. So the water that comes into the well system comes primarily from what falls right in that Green Springs area. Where does it go? This is the average monthly pumping for the Green Springs out of the Green Springs pluton from 2020 until 2023. And you can see, and as we'd expect, it's moving, it's trending up. Yes, we're pumping more water all the time. Where it goes, this is the...
Steve, could you go back, please?
Yeah, sure. Yes, sir.
Actually, we actually end up where we start. We've had some peaks and valleys in there, but the line to the far left and the line to the far right are right at the same place. Correct?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Okay.
That's what the numbers tell us. Yeah, and it's like Pam says, things go up and down. Remember, now this is pumping. This is what's being pumped out of the pluton. And it's hard to judge when you cut and paste these graphs, if you squeeze them down or stretch them out. But yeah, I would say that, within the parameters of this graph, yeah, it's going up, but it's not a tremendous amount. These are the monitoring well levels for the wells that are in the well field from 2020 until just the end of last month. And I know the geologists know a lot more than I do, but I see this trend downward. I don't see, it doesn't appear to me that that these wells are recovering. And yes, in the last 5 months, it's been dry. We're in a drought. The water is not getting back into the pluton to replenish what's being pumped out. And back, you look just below, about the middle of the graph, you can see, and Tam is right, it comes back up, but it's never coming back up as much as it's going down. And way over at a corner of the well field, there's a little USGS well. The USGS comes out irregularly. The guy has a steel tape and he drops it down into this well and measures the water level. And I've been following this little well for years and years. And if you look back in Zion's, when Zion's Crossroads first was, some of us remember that. It was a bunch of trees and a sleepy little area. Bear Island owned most of the land. There wasn't much there. That little well, pretty much, did its own little thing, went up and down for all those years. Then in 2006, we began to develop Spring Creek. And the water level measured in that well began to drop. 2009, went down more. And this is that well started measuring in the late 70s. And, there's no water pumped out of it. It's a little ways away from the other wells, but it gives us an indication, I feel, about what's happening in the water. And the last measurement in April was the lowest measurement in that well that's ever happened in all those years.
Steve, what happened in 2006? Something changed?
That's when they started pumping the water out of the wells. 2000, at a high rate, at a rate that was more than that's when they opened up the. I don't know, Pam's here, she can check that date, but it was around 2006.
Early 2000.
Yeah,
Okay.
when they started pumping the wells to use the water for the Zion's Crossroads area. Now that's when the drop off began. And, every solution that we talk about for the water problem at Zion's Crossroads is precipitation dependent. And as long as we're dependent on God then to get us our water to go to get it to Zion's Crossroads. This particular map, it's old, but it showed at that point the red was a great departure from the normal, being a lot less water than normally falls during that time period. And we talk about the James River. I'll point out that this was the James River in Richmond in 1930. It was dry. And I remember back in 2000 when the James River Runners, I know the folks that run the James River Runners, had to close up shop because there wasn't enough water in the James River at Scottsville for folks to get their canoes and their inner tubes out in the water. So these are my thoughts. This was last week's drought monitor. They have us being an abnormally dry, but I dug a thistle the day before yesterday, and it was nothing but dry. There was no moisture in the top of that soil. And I think about the Department of Health permit, what the amount of water that they allow us to take out of the ground. And even in the 75% is a good idea. You can drive down the interstate 90 miles an hour if you want. So let's say you drive the speed limit, you use 70 miles an hour. They'll run you over. People want to go a lot faster. People want to get this water out of Zion's Crossroads right now. But what if it's slick? What if it's foggy? What if there's smoke obscuring your vision right now? You need to slow down sometimes. You need to consider what's going on. And there are trade-offs in what we're dealing with here. We talked about, a few years ago it was all rooftops. We need rooftops so we can get a grocery store. What was the trade-off? How much was the water we were willing to trade off out of that aquifer to have a grocery store? We know Pam's business is to have a self-sufficient water authority. That's what the purpose of a water authority is to be self-sufficient, to have the taps you need, to be paying for the infrastructure and the salaries and everything else. But I have to question at this point, how much is it worth to pull that much water out of the ground so the Louisa County Water Authority can be self-sufficient? I found this quote this morning, or this afternoon: "A frog does not drink up the pond in which it lives." I think that has a lot of think about how we need to think about our, the water in the Green Springs and how we deal with it. Questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Goodwin?
I want to go back to your next to the last slide where you say how much water is a water authority worth. Forward. It's the second bullet there. What's the alternative? When people move in here, they just drill their own wells? And isn't that the same? Whether we're drilling it out of Green Springs wells and distributing it under some sort of supervision, or letting everybody drill their own wells under no supervision and still drawing out the same aquifer.
But that's not really my point, Mr. Good. My point was more that, we're going, we're willing to go to great expense and great, we've talked with Savannah County about getting their water. We're getting this water. The health department is willing to go up and down to get more water, to have more taps. And I just wonder, it's like you said earlier, if it's easy to give residential taps, it's perhaps harder to run the water out to Shannon Hill, those areas. And incidentally, I have seen, it is moving forward slowly. I have seen the erosion sediment control plan for the pipeline to run to Shannon Hill. So I can help your question there. There are things in the works for that to happen. If it's two pipes, I don't know. But back to the water authority. Yes, I mean, we want to have Pam. We want to have the water authority not tapping into county funds. But I think we just need to do it carefully. We need to have our focus as to get water to the people, and not to have an independent water authority.
Well, again, I'd rather have somebody that I can go to if we got a problem, and that's Ms. Ballman, and say, we got a problem, we need to start planning, rather than letting people come in and independently drill wells, and then I can't go there and tell them they can't use it, and they're all pulling off the same aquifer. So I think there is a value to having a water authority, because it gives us, it gives us a control over the usage if we need to. And I know that happened, 5 years ago, when Spring Creek was cut off from watering the lawns, and because we did have a crisis up there with the wells. Without the water authority, nothing would have stopped that whole community from pumping their wells out of that aquifer and watering their lawns and washing their cars and all that sort of stuff. So I do think that there's a value in the water authority.
I agree 100%.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lucas, just a question. So we saw the monitoring well and the drop-off in that, which we would have expected from pumping starting. I'm curious, and I know this is maybe not scientific, but I'm just curious. Throughout Green Springs, is there anything going on that folks are talking about with their individual wells on farms? I mean, is there anything that notable? I know that it's not, it's not scientific and it's not measured necessarily. I'm just trying to get an idea, a sense of what's happening in the greater community there in Green Springs for the farmers.
And at this point, I know There was one well that failed not far from the well field, but it wasn't a definitive idea if it was the misuse by the land renter or if it was something else, so. But by and large, I don't know of any wells that have gone to a point of being dry yet. The hydrogeologist that Historic Green Springs hired does warn that at some point it could happen. You know, here again, it depends on precipitation, it depends on God.
Sure.
To a large extent, because that's where the water has got to come from.
The well that failed, was that a deep well or a shallow well?
I'm not sure.
And I know from experience that after the earthquake in 2011, some of the wells operate differently than they did. We have a spring on the property that never failed until after the earthquake, and now it goes dry when we have dry weather. I don't suppose.
Interestingly, because of the geology, I haven't heard of any, there wasn't as much damage to older houses. And there were cracked walls and some different things.
Sure.
But because of the difference in geology, the waves came through through the other formations, the older formations, and hit that heavier granite and didn't do as much damage.
Any other
I
questions?
have a question.
Mr. Weaver?
Pam, when these wells are
Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
with drought time and they go low, do we have any way of, like if my well goes down, I can almost tell you when it's come back up. Does the county know that, or is it just,
We do, just like Mr. Lucas said, we do the static well level. We have instruments that go down into the well. We do not do this on production wells because that would create an opportunity for contamination. But we do it on the 14 or 13 monitoring wells that we have.
but we have a pretty good idea how fast these wells come back?
Yeah, we see that on a month, we do that on a monthly basis at the end of the month, every month, and we have to keep those records.
I've always had one other question about the reservoir. How healthy is the reservoir?
The reservoir's pretty healthy. The biggest problem we had was when I talked about disinfection byproducts. When the reservoir was built back in the early 80s, the Game and Inland Fisheries folks thought it'd be a great idea to leave 30 acres of standing trees, and those are all now toppled and as a fish habitat. And that decaying organic matter from the trees and leaves and things, that's what caused our total organic carbon issues when you added chlorine. That was the only thing it would attach to, and that's what was causing our disinfection byproducts. So yeah, the reservoir itself is healthy. We're able to treat that water now. We often call it a carbon-producing machine.
So when that reservoir was built, was that basically built there because of springs, or?
It was built there as a flood control dam originally.
So it
and-
didn't have anything to do with spring water there?
No, not that I'm aware of. It was a
Northeast
flood control
Creek.
dam.
Northeast Creek.
Yeah, I know it was a creek. I just wondered if it was, a lot of these creeks around here are full of springs. I know down that way they
I'm
are.
aware.
No? Okay.
And it was oversized. The county, at that time got involved and said, hey, let's oversize that as a drinking water reservoir.
Now, one other question I have.
Certainly.
Does Orange County draw from Lake Anna?
I don't believe anybody's allowed to draw from Lake Erie.
Nobody?
No, no.
That's false information that I've heard from somebody.
Yeah. We've tried several times.
No.
Thank you.
Don't have to worry about organic material then, you got other stuff to worry about.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Pam.
All right, well.
Really appreciate it. You, and Steve, thank you.
Yes, we appreciate you all coming out. This has been good information to take in, and I think we've raised a few things. I know Mr. Gillespie's been taking notes, a few things we need to maybe recommend to the board to look at. So, very good, thank you. All right, we can move on then to our next item, if I can get my page turned right, which is the proposed amendment, Chapter 14 for Livestock and Poultry. And Mr. Gillespie, who is presenting this? Is it you? Ah, very good.
Thank you. So you were going to have a public hearing on this item when you go into regular session, and we thought it would be helpful to have some discussion, at least opportunity for questions before you go into your public hearing. No, I can put one in there. Yeah, no worries. That's fine. So the Board of Supervisors has been faced with the issue of livestock at large in the county and the responses that have required county resources to respond to what in some cases are private and in some cases arguably public matters. So in response to that has requested the opinions and the hearings before the Agricultural, Forestal, and Rural Preservation Committee and the Planning Commission. So what they have done is first send it to the Ag and Forestal District Committee. The Ag and Forestal District Committee discussed this in April on their meeting on the 26th. And at that meeting, I think it would best be characterized as a split opinion among the members. Again, like the Planning Commission, the committee is an advisory body to the board. It's not a legislative body. The only legislative body we have in the county, of course, is the ultimate authority, the Board of Supervisors. But staff was asked to, staff being administrative staff, law enforcement staff, all the people who are responsible within the county, not so much as a community development issue, but to run this through the Planning Commission to be able to have feedback. So what we have is a draft of what would essentially modify an existing code section for what you typically consider domestic animals running at large, dogs, and extending that into livestock and naming what those livestock are. The community development staff has, very little to add other than usually we become the point of first contact if someone's making a complaint. It's not a, it's not to enforce and have compliance with and responsibility for. So this is your time to discuss this. You will have time again to discuss it after the hearing. But we thought as much time as we thought we might have at this point in your work session, but we thought it might be helpful to have this discussion before you come to the regular meeting. The Code Enforcement Officer, Chief Ellis, will be present tonight, so you can ask some questions at that time. That's all we have. And again, you have draft language in your packet for the public hearing item. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have of me.
Mr. Brooks?
What situations, you refer to several situations, what situations happened that created all of this?
Sure. So essentially, it's livestock animals that are not on their owner's property and go onto a joiner's property. So it could be a chicken, a guinea, a duck, a sheep, could be a goat, could be a cow. So anything that's normally livestock and not considered a household pet is not presently covered under the county's rules. Again, we have our county, assistant county attorney's office here who can speak to what we do have in our code and what is already a civil offense or a civil complaint that someone can make against a neighbor. So what's happening is county resources are being called out for animal control, and it's really livestock that's being called out. And right now, the county code does not address livestock, poultry and cows as something that's subject to animal control.
And in that letter, Mr. Rydell sent, I guess everybody got that email. And then reading this statement, commercial farmers are not the problem. This ordinance is designed to address because they protect their animals. So we're not creating this against the commercial farmer. How do you do that? It's a term Mr. Rydell used, unintended consequences.
Yep.
That I think, in my mind's eye, sums up all of this. How do we create what I see here and not have unintended consequences?
Well, first of all, you get your crystal ball out, and I get my crystal ball out, and we compare notes. I mean, I think there are always unintended consequences with many things, so obviously we try to think through those. But quite honestly, it's very hard to predict every consequence.
Yes, it is. And one other thing.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm gonna follow up with you on that when you finish.
And just to add, I guess this is down under state law, I believe this is what we say is in our existing ordinance. I had to go to Webster to figure what some of these terms were and what kind of animals they were, and Webster's didn't help me out on a couple of them. So, when I look at this, I'm not real sure what kind of animal I'd be talking about.
Sure. Sure.
That's all right now.
Mr. Eldridge just raised his hand, I think, on that point, or maybe a response to that point.
Yeah, just for a point of clarification, so I actually handle most of the civil enforcement, and we have been directed by the board specifically to make sure we're doing everything to give the citizen a chance to remedy whatever is going on, whatever the situation is. With said, that extra link, that is because we have some people who are farming, but they're farming by the name that they may have one cow in their yard on a limited amount of space that isn't necessarily sufficient for a farm. So that's the commercial part. On the other end, we get numerous phone calls for the same offenders that have allowed their to stand on somebody's car, or that happens weekly, or, you know, whatever livestock that there is just continuing to graze on somebody else's land, and they don't care enough to even address it afterwards. So it wouldn't be directed to go after the person who, okay, hey, but you came out to get it next week, or the next day, or probably the next hour because you're trying to make money off your animal. But it would be directed more towards the people who just don't care. A lot of times the animals are overgrown and they haven't been properly cared for. But that goes to a different abuse standard that it's very enforced. So that's the purpose of that extra language in it.
So, let me follow up here, and we'll come back to you. And I want to follow up on that, because that's the thing, one of the things that bothered me about section E there. Is I read that, and to me, that doesn't read like code language, that reads like an explanation. Because I looked for a few things. I looked for the phrase commercial farmer, which doesn't appear as a definition in any of our ordinances. It doesn't appear in the state code anywhere. I wasn't even able to find commercial as a definition. I thought it was odd in our ordinances or the state code. So that, to me, is an interpretation. And, you know, you look beyond E, you look at the rest of it, and, I mean, anybody who has livestock can run afoul of the whole thing and be responsible for a Class 4 misdemeanor just in normal operation, doing a good job with what they do. Because these animals, they got nothing to do all day but eat and get out. And that's what they try to do, because they're always looking for somewhere better to eat. We've had similar problems. I mean, we've had cows, horses, got to go to work one morning. There's a bull in the backyard. It was a neighbor's bull. And, we just had to deal with it. But you deal with your neighbor's animals. I know, it's a different kind of issue. But the whole thing to me seems like it's incredibly difficult to enforce well.
Well, I'll
I don't know.
there's two things to that. So first, I think, just like with a lot of the ordinances we have, I was privileged to sit here when we did the dogs and even our civil penalties, the way that we do that in general. People own dogs, and if you live in a small neighborhood and your dog runs off of your property and you can't get it, technically your dog is violating the ordinance. It's running at large. But those are not the people that are problematic. And there's enforcement mechanisms where you're not gonna just, the first time you see it, or it's an accident, someone is responsible, taking accountability, there's an enforcement part to that. Just like if you're speeding in a car, you know, just because you're doing 1 mile over the speed limit, probably not gonna get stopped. But if you are egregious with it, then there's a different standard. But the board definitely put that in our civil penalties ordinance, that we were supposed to make sure that we were making every effort to help the citizen get back into conformity before we just went through the court process and, you know, tried to give people the harshest penalties that we could come up with. So that's something that could be put into this ordinance as well. On the other hand, I think I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Quarles, you had a question?
Trying to understand some of this. Couple things. One, we received information that there was a 4-4 split on this vote by the Ag and Forestry Department, and, well, or the committee. And 4-4 would denote that that would be a denial or a halt. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was some miscommunication in the carried part, the carried language. It was not a carried vote. It failed. So essentially what that is just like things you guys vote on, and if it fails, it'll still go up to the next level. It'll go up to the board to still make a decision. But the recommendation is, I guess, because they voted and it didn't carry, the recommendation is now to not recommend it for you guys. They're recommending that you don't recommend it.
Okay, so it's a denial. Okay, so the next thing is, well, in a statement, we've had things in place prior to this. This county just didn't get started. And it's kind of like reinventing the wheel. I know that there are incidences that have happened in the past. One that I remember probably 3 years ago, where there was some animals that weren't being taken care of properly, some cattle and some other animals, and they were running at large, and some of them were malnourished. And at that point, it was given, the county went in and took control of those animals and redistributed them. I'm wondering why this is any different. I understand that there was I got a hand back there, but I understand there was a situation where, the goats walking on a car, and there were some issues that the animals at large created. But I'm wondering why we couldn't make that owner make the owner of the loss whole. In other words, replenish them for their losses, and/or cite the individual and say, okay, this is an isolated case, but if it happens in the future and it continues to happen, we're going to take this measure of activity and we're going to go for it. Why do we create a law or new law to change that?
So the case that you were speaking of, fell under a different code section. They were able to seize those animals under the cruelty code.
Okay.
If livestock is at large, they're not overgrown, nothing else is wrong with them except they're running at large and destroying folks' property, I don't have enough to meet the cruelty code to seize them at that point. So I'm left with the civil remedy, which in a current case has already been applied, and I'm still going every day to chase the same goats while we're waiting on a $7,000 court case to go through civil court.
Follow-up. You don't think that animals getting out into the roadway or possibly transversing off the property would be a cruelty issue, not controlled by the owner?
It's not covered under the cruelty code for animals.
I'd like to see that specific, that, I would think that you would have, when you have those animals, you have the responsibility to care for them, and care for them would be to contain those that need to keep them out of harm's way.
You do, but under care of agricultural animals, they have to provide feed to prevent malnutrition, water to prevent dehydration,
In vet service.
and adequate space and vet care, and that is it.
I've been to the code on that one. I
say
thought
anything
that might
about
be the answer.
And I think when we looked into it previously, one of the issues were that the animals that were actually off of their property were grazing off of other people's land, so they weren't necessarily malnutrition as long as they were going to someone else's yard. That
Sounds
was
like-
Street fund, just somebody else's stuff.
Sounds like theft to me.
My issue is not that they were eating or that they were drinking. My issue is that they were outside of their fence or their area that they.
It's not defined by state code as cruelty.
Well, in the issue of the one that we were talking about earlier, they were talking about animals, part of that was the animals were at large. There were animals that were more than a mile
Doesn't
away.
meet the definition of cruelty, and it doesn't meet the definition of abandonment, because I checked that one too. It has to be willful abandonment, and I forget the other word.
Intentional.
Yeah.
Willful and intentional.
Well, if
Cruelty has
something's
to be
done
the same.
repeatedly, it's not intentional? I mean, if I.
Code says it has to be willfully and intentionally done. It's the same as the cruelty code leads with that as well.
Good one.
I have spent more than a couple of hours in the state code. And I've also talked to a couple of people on the Ag and Forestall District, Mr. Chairman, and there is a solution in the state code. And it is around the definition of a legal fence. But the board has to take an action before you can do that. And I can tell you that what bothers me most about this is I don't see anything in here about willful or wanton negligence in this. Repeated offender says 2 or more times or 3 or more times within 2 years. And I preface everything I say, I've been running cattle for 40 years, my family for 250, and they have gotten off of my property one time, and it's because of summer storms, knocking down trees. We have no control over summer storms or winter storms and fences going down.
Right.
All right? But if I've got a fence that I'm not maintaining, it's inadequate, then that's willful. I'm not doing my job. That is negligence. I don't see that in here.
I have not seen what you're looking at, so I don't know what you're looking at.
But I'm willing to sit down, and what I'm going to say, Mr. Chairman, my move tonight is going to be to defer this and to give me an opportunity to work it out within that definition of a lawful fence, because I think that's the answer. And then, when livestock gets off of the property, regardless, they are subject to being cited. And then once they're cited, we can get it into that non-compliance ordinance that we just passed a couple of months ago, where we can say, okay, you've been warned, you got so many days, boom, 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 and eventually it gets into court. But I need to work on it. It's not ready for prime time tonight, but I got it. Anybody wants to sit down and talk about it, I've got the method to do it right here.
Very good.
Mr. Chair. You can look up the definition of willful fence and all the other references in the state code of how we can do it.
I think as of right now, Louisa County is, the lawful fence is the boundary line of the property. As of right now, that's where it stands.
No.
Mr. Chair.
That is not correct. Lawful fence is written to keep animals out in the code, not in, okay? Well, it's great detail. 4 strands of barbed wire, 42 inches, number of planks, gates, cattle guards, everything else, but the law is written to keep animals out and not in, as if we would not want animals to get into Northeast Creek Reservoir, and if we don't want that to happen and we want to hold somebody responsible, we have to put a lawful fence up. But the county, to get to where I want to flesh out, the county can pass a resolution that declares every parcel border a lawful fence.
Yes, that's been passed.
And if they pass that, then you don't need to do anything. You can cite them the minute they get off my property or anybody else's property, because now they have crossed a lawful fence, and that is in violation of the Code of Virginia.
It is, but there's not a penalty for that violation.
No, but we can put them into the non-compliance stream, which we just passed, which then starts putting a penalty on them because you haven't complied, you haven't kept them on your property, and we can eventually get them in court over that. I did not know the county has passed that. I know Augusta has passed
Yeah,
it.
the county has passed that. The issue we ran into was there's still no enforcement mechanism to actually say that. The state code where we got that authority from
Right.
only says that once the livestock is off of the property, it's unlawful, and it just stops there. It gives us no penalties, nothing.
Well, that's like being unlawful or violating the state building code. We can then cite them for being not compliant, and we can start that compliance cycle.
In those cases, there's enabling legislation that gives us what penalties we can actually enforce and what we can actually do in those situations. It'll say sometimes $200 fine, class, whatever, misdemeanor.
We just passed our own that doubles it as it goes up for so many days, and eventually it'll go to court. We can't put a lawful fence into a non-compliance stream that we just passed.
What you're saying, I do not think is possible.
I want to have a chance to work on that,
All right.
because I think it is possible.
Mr. Woodward, you had a question, and then we'll be with Mr. Quarles.
Yes. And considering Mr. Goodwin's hopefully being able to resolve this, but going back to the questions that I had and comments after reading this, referring to E, the commercial farmers, my personal opinion, that whole sentence should be struck from here, because I think the last sentence takes care of all of what that's trying to say without specifying somebody's being eliminated from it applying to them. So, anyway, and I have a hard time believing if it's only several situations, but that certainly is what this document says, several situations. I don't know that it really needs to say several situations. You know, if we have a problem, we have a problem. But I'm not sure I'm sold on that we need to have a new ordinance to take care of this. When people move to Louisa County, they move to a rural county. You're gonna have problems with animals. I believe you've already said, situation with a goat standing up on somebody's car, obviously it's doing damage to that car. I think you can take that to small claims court. Virginia doesn't call it that, but that's what it is.
Actually, this section says you have the right for actual damages.
Yeah. So, and you say it takes a long time to get it, but,
I did not say that.
well, you said that whatever the money was, that $700,000 or whatever.
They filed that suit, it's going through court. but
Okay.
While that's going through, the goats are still.
Well, and that's probably gonna happen no matter what you do. But habitual offender with 3 or more violations within 2 years, well, 2 years is pretty good while if you're having a problem. Y'all continue to have to go out there.
I've never seen, I don't know what.
So, well, it's here. So,
That document that you have came directly from the ag district.
that's
That
not
was-
what I understand, but
That was their recommended language that they came up with.
no, I don't know that it makes any difference, but it's here. So, somebody put this, I think what I read here, it says that this was presented to them at their April meeting. I don't think it said anywhere that they created it at their April meeting.
Or recommended it.
Right. So I don't know. The whole thing, this memo is screwy, and this document has a lot of problems in it, in my opinion.
Mr. Chair, I do think we owe it to the citizens to fix it. I do. If there's a fix in it, and I believe there is, I think I can work with you, Kyle, and the Ag Committee, and I think there's something that we can do with that illegal fence definition. And if was not aware that the county had already made that resolution, that every property line is a legal fence. They've done that. Okay. Then I think we've got room to work and then get it into that compliance thing. But I need to work with you and the Ag and Forestall District because, quite frankly, I wrote here, this is a sledgehammer approach to a finishing hammer problem. And I don't care what E says, notwithstanding, to say, I'm going to pass this, but I don't intend to do that. That's leaving it up to people to, well, I know you didn't intend to, but I'm going to do it. If you want to abuse the law as a law enforcement, I don't think you will, but I don't know who the next animal control officer is going to be. They might. To say, this is not my intent, but I'm going to put it in anyway, that's not the way to do it. That's not the way to do it. That's relying on personalities to follow through on that, and I think we need to do a better job. And I think we can if you'll give us a chance.
Okay, so, Mr. Quarles, did you have anything else you want to say here before we take a
Get
brief,
on
before we take? Well, we can certainly pick it up during the, anyway, go ahead.
I certainly agree with George on that. Leaving up to the personal aspect is never a good thing. Josh, if I will, Louisa's fence in or fence out, what is that term we discussed earlier?
The legal fence in the code is written
Fence.
as a fence out definition and not a fence in.
So we are fence out? Is that what we discussed earlier, you and I?
We didn't really discuss that, but, I mean, I think generally we didn't get that specific.
Okay.
But to the specifics, fenced out is the object, right? So if a fence is established, then it's preventing trespass.
But according to Kyle, we have already done that because it is an option in the state code that the local governing body can declare each property line, each parcel boundary, a legal fence, which means, in essence, my property is already legally fenced, and if you cross it, you're in violation of state code. And I've got a copy of that section right here.
Let's follow up.
Yes.
So, Louisa County, one of the backbones of Louisa County is cattle. And I just know that it's, like George says, that they've had it for a long time. I mean, and now all of a sudden we're having to rewrite the laws. I think there are some things in place that we already have, and you're saying that that's not the case, but I guess what I'd like to do is I'd probably like to, along the same line, look at it, maybe defer it, and let us look at it, let us get together with some factual information, because like Commissioner Woodward said, we're receiving different information, it's not going together. And so I think this thing needs a little more work, a little more investigation before we can accurately move this up to the board. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, so what I want to do now, since we're in a work session, we're not in the official part of the
Right.
meeting, and we will talk about this later, and we have very little time before 7 o'clock. I'd like to end the work session now. We can finish the discussion during the meeting, and we'll probably be 2 or 3 minutes late starting, about 7:03 or so, for those who need, like me, to step out for a moment and come back. So we'll end the work session. We'll be back very shortly for the regular meeting. Thank you. You're gonna have, no, you're gonna have 10 minutes recorded, okay?
I think you gotta use a little common sense in this.
figure something out. All right, good evening. We're going to open this June meeting of Louisa Planning Commission. We'll start with a call to order. Mr. Rogers? I'm sorry, roll call, Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Barlow?
Here.
Mr. Brooks?
Here.
Mr. Weaver? Here. Mr. Disway?
Here.
Mr. Manning?
Here.
Mr. Quarles?
Here.
Mr. Goodwin?
Present.
Dave's here.
Here.
Mr. Jarvis? Here. Mr. Purcell?
Very good, thank you. All right, if you'll please rise for the invocation led by Commissioner Dickerson and the Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Woodward.
Let us pray. Father God, once again, we thank you for bringing us here together tonight to be good stewards of Louisa County. Thank you for those who established and perpetuated Louisa to get it to this point. Help us to make wise decisions so that future generations may benefit. In your most holy name we pray. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. We'll move on to the approval of the agenda we have before you. Do we have a motion to
So
approve
moved.
the agenda? And a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the agenda? All right, all those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Very good. We'll move on to approval of the minutes of the May meeting in packet pages 2 through. Need a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any comments on the minutes? All in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. And before we go to the consent agenda, I just want to take a moment here. Mr. Gillespie, we do have some new people here joining us. And if you could make an introduction, please, so.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you. So we have Savannah Ross joining us. She's our new community development technician. Savannah is in the Lake Anna area over towards Spotsylvania and has come to work from one of our nearby counties. You really shouldn't name where you poach your people from, but no, just kidding. We're very fortunate to have Savannah's experience from Caroline County, where she's worked with financial affairs and real estate records. And so that's a big help to us coming to work. We've repositioned the role a little bit. We had some new positions that were funded by the board in last year's budget, and we've talked about those before. This is one of those, and so as a community development technician, it's planning and zoning, as well as some of our other subject areas. So that's building and building permits. She's not a principal building permit technician, but will also be able to assist there, as well as our code cases. And so we have a little cross-training and interdisciplinary work within the department, which we're thrilled to have. And Savannah has stepped into that role very well in her time with us in the last month. She's really the newest face, and Deborah Johnson's on vacation this week. So Curtis, who wears many, many hats, including his newest as Deputy Subdivision Agent for the county, I think I mentioned at your last meeting, the board had just recognized him for that, is also wearing the Assistant Secretary hat tonight.
Very good. Thank you. All right.
Curtis says every new hat gets extra pay.
All right, we'll move on. Next is consent agenda. We don't have a consent agenda tonight, so we'll move on to the public address period. Public address period is a time that we have for anyone in the audience to address the commission on anything that is not a public hearing in tonight's meeting. So if there's something you want to say to the commission, when I open the public address period, you'll have 3 minutes to say that. Again, if it's part of a public hearing tonight, there'll be a separate public address during each one of the public hearings. So anything that is not a part of the public hearing is what we will be hearing from now. So we'll open the public address period. Is anybody who would like to speak to the commission? Very well, seeing none, close public address period. Move on to unfinished business. And under unfinished business, which I do have here somewhere, there we go. Looking for a brief discussion on small area plans, where we stand on that.
All right, so we have our materials in draft form for small area plans on their basic language, and adding the materials in the appendices for the comp plan for public facilities, public services, that includes public schools, water, which we talked about, water and wastewater, parks and recreation. So we have draft documents and all that. Some of that may also inform the focus areas of the small area plans that we had developed with the working group back through last fall. Again, points of information on all those. So we hope to bring back to you next month some updated information. But right now, we have a draft that I'm reviewing.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Goode.
do we have do we plan to get the working group back together prior to bringing it before the commission?
Maybe not prior to, just because of the difficulty of, just because of scheduling reasons. But what we will definitely do is get it back together. But we may be done with editing what we have before we can get you all together. So, because it's essentially 3 to 4 weeks from now when you're meeting again, so, as a body. So, we will try, but I still have another 4 or 5 days to go on document review. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
All right, I believe we did have an item here on gateway ordinances as well.
Correct.
Let's see. The major gateway that we've talked about is Route 208 coming into Louisa County. We had received some material from the state and would like to bring that back to you as it relates to the road realignment, which again, the gateways and corridors are related, but can be a little different. If we're looking at a length of road, and it may have a different purpose as a gateway into a community, which is to be sort of the front door and the welcome mat and the foyer, as opposed to just literally at the gate that you open to get to the yard. So we don't have anything on draft ordinances other than what I've shared before, where we've talked about design review committees based on heritage tourism under law and how that can be affected. If you would like more on that, I would suggest that the working group look at gateways as an item.
Again, if I may, just
Yes.
to get back to how the intent when we started this was to come up with general ordinances on gateways through the various growth areas that we have in the county. I know you've talked about 234 being a long gateway, but we were just talking about more of what do we do to protect the integrity of the growth areas?
Right.
Very interested in working on that.
Okay. So again, I think that the working group for the small area plans is the best place for that to go. And there are two concepts for gateways. One is potentially regulatory as it relates to setbacks and architectural standards, and the other is the gate at the edge of the property where you put up a sign that says, "Welcome to Louisa," right? And it reminds people that this is a place and a place that matters, or it may say, "Welcome to Ferncliff," or "Welcome to Zion Crossroads," if you're trying to establish some identity for that point.
Right. So it sounds like that's going to be a continuation of the small area plan group then,
That's
in order to accomplish that.
that's my recommendation.
I would say the only way we're gonna ever get a gateway on 208 is we ever get that road widened. Then we can have a nice gateway through there. Ain't too much gateway on 208 the way it is.
The next item I had for unfinished business was the ag and forestal districts with zoning other than agriculture, and I'll report on that I did speak to Supervisor Dwayne Adams about that. He's interested in working with the Planning Commission, and I believe that was, from my notes, that was Mr. Goodwin and Mr. Dickerson on that as well. So I would say contact him and ask him when he wants to, I'd ask him to assign a board member, which I thought he would do at Monday night's
Mondays,
meeting.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure he did that, but I think that would be forthcoming. So call him and ask him where they stand. And I think they're interested as well in bringing in a member of the Ag and Forestal Committee, which would be wise to do. So that would be good. And the other item was water at Zion Crossroads, and we had a good discussion on that tonight. So I think we're in pretty good shape. We have some notes that you're going to take back on that, Mr. Gillespie, and we'll continue to percolate on that a little bit. And that's what I have for unfinished business.
If I may, I should have also recognized, this is my unfinished business from new faces
Okay.
here. My apologies. Kyle, would you mind giving a quick introduction for Doug? From your chair, if you want. Or either way.
This is Doug. This is our individual intern. Doug has been with us almost 2 weeks now, and he's helping out in the office, and he's great to have around.
Summer intern in the county attorney's office.
Welcome.
Very good.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So then we can move on to public hearings. The first public hearing we have tonight is CUP 2023-02, Louisa Solar One LLC. Mr. Eklund.
A lot of paperwork. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Tom Eglin. I'm the Senior Planner for Louisa County's Community Development Department. And before you tonight is CUP 2023-02, a request from the applicant, Louisa Solar One LLC, a subsidiary of New Energy Equity LLC, and the owner, Benjamin W. Ochs, for the issuance of a 35-year conditional use permit to allow for a solar generation facility utility scale in the A2 agricultural zoning district, which would generate up to 5 megawatts AC. Approval of such a facility also requires the Louisa County Planning Commission to find the project substantially in accordance with the 2040 Louisa County Comprehensive Plan pursuant to Virginia Code 15.2-2232. The project is located north of Clockner Road, about 500 feet from the boundary line between Louisa County and Albemarle County. The property is located in the General Agricultural A2 zoning district, further identified as tax map parcel 1-3, and is designated rural by the 2040 Comprehensive Plan's future land use map. The project is located in the Green Springs election district and is adjacent on two sides to the Gordonsville growth area district. There is no evidence that the current zoning and land use is not economically viable. If the project was not approved to be a solar generation facility, utility scale, then agricultural A2 zoning would allow for many different types of agricultural uses and some residential uses. The property could be used as a single-family home site, timber operation, or general farming by right. According to the applicant, the project site is currently a harvest crop of loblolly pine trees. The proposed project plans to take up only 43.9 acres, while the remainder of the 118.873 acre parcel is currently a farm with residence where the landowner's father currently resides. This is the first project to go before the Planning Commission in the 5 megawatts AC range. Portions of this project offer a 300-foot buffer and setback as detailed on staff packet page 93 in the applicant's concept plan. However, the eastern and western boundaries of the proposed solar project do propose buffers and setbacks less than 300 feet in width. Applicants are able to request reduced buffers below 300 feet in width if they provide visual simulations and cross-section diagrams, which can be found from pages 152 to 161 of the staff packet. The Board of Supervisors will review the applicant's request for a buffer and setbacks on the eastern portion of the property to be only 220 feet in width with 4 staggered rows of supplemental plantings due to multiple utilities within the 220-foot proposed setback. The Board of Supervisors will also review the applicant's request for a buffer and setback on the western portion of the property of only 170 feet of existing mature vegetation with some supplemental planting. The purple boxes on the slide currently shown detail the locations of the project that the supplemental vegetation will be required according to the applicant's preliminary engineering. This image is also on page 95 of your staff packet. In a neighborhood meeting that took place in this room on April 13th, 2023, 5 individuals attended. A summary of the questions, comments, and concerns from the citizens about the Ochs Solar Project from those that attended that neighborhood meeting can be found in Enclosure 1, Exhibit U, page 274 of your staff packet. Within Enclosure 8 and Enclosure 9 at the back of your staff packet, you will find the Fire and EMS and Virginia Department of Transportation initial comments. If this project is approved, those agencies will conduct a further review of the project during the site plan review process. Staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit with 32 conditions starting on packet page 14. Staff believes the project would support the comprehensive plan goal of economic diversity. And as tradition, I leave you with a map of all the current and existing solar projects within Louisa County. Lastly, there is a Scribner's error in condition 1 on page 14 that states the project is 20 megawatts AC. That is a Scribner's error. It should be 5 megawatts AC, and we recommend that being cleaned up in the motion tonight. That concludes staff's report, and staff's happy to answer any questions you might have.
Does the commission have any questions for the staff at this time? Mr.
Chairman,
Goodwin.
if I may. Mr. Eglin, just a very quick question, unless I missed it. Is this project as presented in accordance with the solar ordinance that we passed this past year?
It would appear to be so, yes, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other than the request for the 2 waivers that the Board of
Other than the
Supervisors
variances.
would have to
Okay,
grant.
got you.
Any other questions at this time? All right, thank you, Mr. Eglin.
Thank you.
I'm going to open the public hearing portion for this, this CUP. The first speaker during the public hearing will be the applicant, who will have 10 minutes to present, and then we'll go on to the public. So the public address period is open, and you ready? Who you are?
Thank you. So much technology and so many pages. I feel bad being a clean energy guy and killing so many trees, so I'm gonna have to plant a few just to feel better about that one. My name is Jesse Diamond. I am the representative for New Energy Equity and the applicant. I'm a senior solar developer, and I do thank everybody for their time tonight. I want to throw out a special thank you to Tom Eglin. The ordinance here has been enlightening in the sense that it challenged us to do a better job. And we value growing, and the ordinance here that you guys put forwards and the work that Tom, the work that he put in to help us get us to this point is really impressive. Tom does an amazing job, and so thank you, Tom, so much for your help. And thank you, Board, for giving us an opportunity to grow as a company. We learned a lot on just how to build a little bit better project. We've been doing this for years, and this ordinance actually taught us something. So we'll continue to do work based off of this and do better in the future just purely because of it. So a little bit about our project. Our project is a 5 megawatt shared solar project. Shared solar is different than utility scale. The major difference is that utility scale is more like a power plant. The power that they produce goes into the transmission network and is used regionally. Shared solar is a specific program that has a 5 megawatt cap. That 5 megawatt cap is defined by the rules set by the state. And our program has a capacity of 150 megawatts currently, can be expanded up to 200 megawatts. So our overall impact on the entire state that Dominion, and we're also required to be in Dominion's network, is only up to 200 megawatts. So we're trying to find small parcels to do shared solar. Shared solar is a benefit to the community. What it does is it essentially gives the citizens an opportunity that may not be able to put solar on their own home, a business that may not be able to put it on their business, to subscribe to the power that we produce and we meter, and then we can give that power back as credits to the subscribers, and we do that at a reduced rate below what Dominion does. On average, that's about 10%. And so for each megawatt annually, we estimate that to be about $30,000 annually per megawatt. So about $150,000 for the community that goes back into their pocket that they would spend otherwise on electricity. 30% of that is required to go to low income. And so that is a benefit to the people that may benefit from it the most. So that's just a short breakdown of what shared solar is. Does anybody have any questions on that? I just ask because sometimes I can over-explain it or not explain it enough, and I think that it's really important to point out what shared solar is and different than what utility scale is.
Why don't you continue on the presentation? We'll come back and pick up questions later.
Absolutely.
That'll work better.
So, again, a 5 megawatt project. It's located near industrial uses. So within the vicinity, within sight of that actual facility, there's the Pentaplast Plastics Factory, there's railroad tracks, there's 2 substations within one across the street and one just down the road. There's also 2 power plants that are producing power right now. So it fits in the character of the area. It's directly adjacent to 2 properties that are industrial use. We estimate that we'll have about $5 million of economic impact. And again, the monthly savings to the citizens is really, really important to differentiate what shared solar is intended to do. The state set goals for Dominion and for Appalachia Power in the Virginia Clean Economic Act, which is the VCEA. It says that by 2045, Dominion has to be 100% clean energy. And so shared solar helps Dominion to get to that goal by allotting 150 and up to 200 in this first round of what shared solar is towards that goal of meeting that. So we're happy to have our place in helping Virginia meet the goals that they set in 2020 towards their 100% clean energy goals. Again, I mentioned that the shared solar facility means that apartment dwellers and households without sufficient space to install their own solar gets to use this energy. Cost savings, clean energy, a lot of people are looking for opportunities to that. The existing conditions, again, you can see on this map where the industrial uses are, where the gas power generation plant, where the substation, another power substation, the railroad tracks are on the east side of it. And so that gives a decent representation of how it's directly adjacent to all these like uses and why our facility is a very good fit because it keeps in the same type of character. So there's actually 2 slides with kind of the same language, but we wanted to show you this. So when we went to the neighborhood meeting, this was the original design that we had. And so you can see an area that kind of juts out into a point kind of to the northwest. And so some of the feedback that we got at the meeting was that that was an area of concern for the neighboring landowner. And so we went back to the drawing board and wanted to understand what we could do to accommodate his main concerns of that area, impacting his possible future uses. And so we went back to the drawing board, and we essentially drew a flat line and cut that entire piece off. And so I'm really proud of what our engineers were able to do. And this just shows our commitment to getting down to the design and sitting down with people and discussing it to make sure that we're doing our best to accommodate what people are looking for. And so this design is a direct reflection of the conversations that we've had with the neighbor and our engineers to try and find the best design to accommodate concerns, and also obviously what we need to do to meet the obligations of what we've committed to Dominion in our study. The project is going to be just over 22 acres. I think it's 22.15 acres fenced in. The overall permitted area is 43.9 acres, and that area is including buffer areas and areas where if we needed to replace trees, that's why we're asking for the area that large, is just so that we can keep up the buffer areas, the grass areas, and whatnot around the facility. We will have 2 equipment pads, and we will have 6 above-ground utility poles. The waivers will be shown in the next plan, and also there's some IDs. And so the 2 major waiver areas are area 1.2 and 1.5. And 1.2 is going to be along the neighbor's property, Tom Gilbert. And so he was at the neighborhood meeting. We've had plenty of conversations about what his concerns are. And so we've talked about if 150-foot buffer area with 20 feet of grasses would be sufficient. And I believe that we both are in agreement that that should be sufficient. Also, along the Klockner Pentaplast area, we also have another area that's 220 feet. And I've actually talked to the Klockner plant. I reached out to them on May the 10th. I talked to a Jeff Kratzer, who's a facility manager. We had a nice conversation. He had just some general questions about what we're trying to do. I sent him the plans and sent him an email, and obviously encouraged him to give us any feedback if he or anybody else had any. We haven't heard back from them, so my assumption is that they didn't have any other questions, and so they seem fine with the facility being there. But the 1.5 area is going to be right along the Pentaplast area. This is a map of it that just shows kind of what these areas are. The existing mature vegetation is going to be in area 1.2, 1.1, and 1.5. 1.5 is 61 feet wide, and that's along Pentaplast. It has 159 feet of grasslands to be 220 feet. And then along the road, we have 300 feet of existing trees that are going to stay. There is a temporary laydown area that we will replant. And then there's an additional 20 feet of grasslands. So we're actually doing 320 feet. And then 1.2 is along the neighbor's property. Again, that's 150 feet of trees, 20 feet of grasses. We also have 1.3, which is over 300 feet of existing trees. And then 1.4, which kind of points towards one of the power plants and substation areas. That one will have a minimum of 50 to 61 feet of trees. And then there'll be some low-lying trees, grasslands, and whatnot in that area also. Some of that area is considered a wetland, and so our goal was to disturb no wetlands, which we were able to do. We were able to steer around a small creek and stay out of the wetland to the northeast there. Environmental and stormwater. So we do have one crossing, a creek crossing, and so it's an existing one that's used. We will have to bring it up to the standards that are set by VDOT, the county, the DEQ, so that we're making sure that we're meeting all those requirements. And so there's a little bit about that. But this just shows kind of where the stormwater management facilities are, where the fenced-in area is, and just kind of the general layout of kind of what it's going to look like and where we're going to build. We do plan to keep this in agriculture. So one of the major questions at the neighborhood meeting was whether or not we were able to do that. And so we've heard about and we're trying to do our first in New York with sheep grazing. And so we're going to continue that with this project. We've sent out a letter of intent to the neighbor, and we've supplied that as an exhibit that shows that we are committing to keeping the maintenance of the grasses local, and that we're committed to trying to do sheep grazing within the fence. We've given the right of first refusal to the neighbor, who is a farmer, and so we encourage him to do that. We've talked about that in length. And again, I think that we both are on the same page where I think that's a great benefit. If for some reason he does not do that, we still intend to keep everything local and look into sheep grazing as an option. But our preference would be the neighbor that's right there. If he already has the facilities and already a farmer, it just makes sense. So that's what our plan is. In conclusion, this site, in my opinion, is about as good of a location as you get. You don't often get to put solar next to other industrial uses. You often see it in a large agricultural area, and they are just randomly placed out there. But this just happens to be next to the substation that's going to go to across the street. This just happens to be next to a large industrial building. Happens to be next to railroad tracks, so it does create the same likeness, in our opinion. The benefits to the community are huge. That savings is yearly and then extrapolated. So the savings of $150,000 over 25, 35, 40 years is going to really add up for people. I was talking to somebody in the community and went to lunch here, rented an inn here. And while I was sitting down to lunch, I stepped out to take a call, and I think they looked at my computer, kind of wondering what I was doing. And we started chatting, and they said that their bill is about $800 to $900 a month for electricity. Now that seems really high to me, but I'm going to take them for their word. They said they had a larger house, and it's 3 stories, and cooling that upper area is expensive, but that person would save between $80 to $90 a month. That's a lot of money to anybody. So I think that just shows that the benefit to the community is there. We do intend to do a siting agreement as is stipulated in the rules by the community. And so Josh and I will continue our conversation, set up a meeting, and work through a siting agreement. We've presented one. And hopefully what we've used in other communities will be appropriate. Because we're smaller, we basically just take generally what utility scale does, and we do it proportionally to ours. I believe that one of your approved solar facilities is 220 megawatts, so it's larger than our entire program together. So obviously we want to be proportional. But we can do it in scale, and so that's our intent, is to do a siting agreement in scale to all the other projects. Again, we're over 300 feet from the road. Our line of sight drawings, what we've observed and our experience show that there will be no visibility from the road. The neighbor will have no visibility. The Klockner plant will have no visibility. All of the visibility will be absorbed through the existing vegetation and new vegetation that will be planted. And so the the impact on anybody else should be very minimal. Traffic-wise, there will be a little bit of traffic coming to bring stuff in, but once it's up and running, it kind of runs itself. Somebody checks on it once in a while. The neighbor will come by and keep track of the sheep and water and feed them and do whatever they need to do. But essentially, there's no traffic once it's up and running. Yeah, that's really it. I do have a drone video. Does anybody have the time? I wanted to know how much time I had left.
Well, you actually exceeded your 10-minute allotment for the presentation, but I tell you what, why don't you go ahead and show how long is your drone video?
It's 5 minutes long, but I'd be happy to take, I know, I'm a chatter and my video is a little long, but I'd be happy to answer questions while it's running, if that's okay.
I didn't want to get into questions right now, but go ahead, play the video.
Okay.
We don't have a difficult agenda tonight, but anyhow.
So this is right along the road, right above where the access road is going to be, or maybe just a little bit to the east of it. This shows the Klockner plant, the railroad tracks, the existing transmission lines. In the back is one of the power plants. This is pointing towards the neighbor's property and down Klockner Road to the west. It'll turn around and show the substation that we'll be feeding into in another area that produces power, and again, where the transmission lines are coming and going. Spins around. Let's see. Do I have control over? Okay. If we skip to kind of the last minute or so, I think that might be helpful. It shows basically on the border of where the neighbor is and where we are, and just shows the thickness of the trees. I do want to point out in the last few seconds, it does drop down, and in my opinion, the third or fourth tree is about where you stop being able to see any trees behind it. And so if the trees are anywhere from 10 to 15 feet, it's anywhere from 30 to 60 feet in is about where you stop being able to see anything behind it. And so I think this is a really good representation of kind of 150 feet, the 60 feet along the railroad tracks. It really does just show how mature trees will do a good job of eliminating that visual. All right. I want to thank everybody again. We do have our local engineer that helped us with the drawings. We do have a couple of the owners that are in attendance, so if you have any questions for any of us, we are all here to answer any of your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will have 5 minutes for you at the end if there's anything you wish to address that comes out of the other public comments. So thank you for that. So now I don't have any cards for anyone who wants to speak tonight. So I'm going to ask, does anyone wish to come forward and speak on this? If so, you'll please come to the microphone. You'll need to state your name and your voting location, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you're representing an organization, let me know that. Then you have 5 minutes. But go ahead.
Good evening, I'm Tom Gilbert, the neighbor. I've met some of you at the community meeting. I know I only have a little time, but I want to thank the staff. The staff has been great. A lot has changed since the meeting because of them and working with the developer. I've had a lot of concerns and voiced them pretty high, and they did change the design. They've met a lot of my concerns, and I don't have really that much opposition to it, and I think that y'all could go forward with what you do. I still have a few concerns that will come to the supervisors that don't pertain here, but everything they've done has been great. I mean, they've met them. I do have a couple things that I would hope that you would add, and he had touched on them. You know, this is rural, the solar is green energy, they're using to cut it fossil fuels. And they've said that they would run sheep and they would let me do it, but if something happens and I can't, I want it to stay agriculture. I would like for you all to make it a condition that it stays in agriculture, sheep grazing, which is the only logical thing. And then also, I guess this is the time now that if we have an agricultural well put on the place. I know it's part of the planning deal, but of course animals will need water. But that's all I have, and like I said, the main thing is they've worked with me, and I'm happy, and with the setback, you know, I know it's not what is allowed, but with you guys granting them it, I'm okay with that. There's enough of a buffer there that I think that it will be fine for my future, my operation. I appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come forward and speak on this? Very well, then, before I close, would the applicant like to have any final statement?
I've said enough, thank you.
All right, then. We're going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commissioners for discussion. Mr.
You always
Goodwin.
look at me first.
We might as well just start and
You may as
go.
well get it over with.
There you go.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do. I've got, a couple of questions for the applicant, if you would come forward, please. Some of this is because I don't understand how shared works versus large scale.
Yeah.
You are providing the power to your neighborhood.
Correct. The power goes directly into the distribution network from our facility.
Okay, so my question was going to be what happens in case of an outage? So they are still hooked to Dominion.
Correct. So we're just adding resiliency. We're upgrading anything that needs to be upgraded to accommodate our facility, whether that's the actual three-phase lines themselves to be able to handle the voltage that is going through the lines previously, and what we're going to be adding additionally, if any substation upgrades are required because the capacity is used up, we would upgrade that.
I think you've answered my question. I just want to make sure that if something happens at your facility, they're still hooked to the grid.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm not going to get into the vegetative buffer because I've got something I'm going to read later on.
Okay.
But it's hard to tell on the shot that you gave us whether that was evergreen or deciduous, which makes a difference, the visibility at different times of the year.
Okay.
The one question, sheep will be kept out of the pollinator area?
Let me think. So the pollinator area, no. The pollinator area is going to be approximately 10% of the inside the
Right.
fenced-in area, and so
The sheep will be inside the fenced-in area too, though.
that's correct.
So how are you going to maintain your pollinator area?
So the pollinator area is required to be approximately 10%, and so
What are you going to do if a sheep eat it up? That's where I'm getting at.
yeah, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't thought of that before. Again, I'm new to sheep, so I'll bring that question back to my team, and I can discuss that with Tom Gilbert to see what solutions we have to that. But I think you make a good point. It's just not something that I've thought about, and that's probably already been addressed. I'm still just learning the sheep grazing part of it, because this is my first project that we've proposed it.
They're not going to be compatible.
Okay.
So if we're going to stick to the 10% pollinator, the sheep can't be in the pollinator area.
Okay.
They're going to eat it up.
Sure, and so it's approximately 11 to 20 feet on the border, so maybe we need to fence off 11 to 20 feet of the border to allow for that.
You can do it with electric fences inside your regular fence to just keep them out of that area. It'll increase your maintenance, but they can't be, that's cross purposes. That won't work.
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah, and absolutely, and thank you. Again, this is my first one, so I'm going to take that note back to my team.
Okay, just one last thing. This may be for staff, but you may know the answer. Does a shared utility also go through the PBR process in Richmond?
No, we go through, a utility scale goes through a more like legislative process than we do. I don't know the details of it because I've never done a utility scale, but I do know that we go through a specific review process with with Dominion. It's a study process, but we don't have to go through the state level energy review process.
You have to go through DEQ.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And DEQ in the last year has definitely made some major changes to how they study stormwater runoff, pervious versus impervious. And so we're very well aware of and have kept very good track of how that works.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Weaver?
what's the total projection for the revenue to the county from this per year?
We provided a economics and fiscal contribution study, and in that study, the overall, let's see, on year one from the siting agreement, we're estimating $7,000 because it's 1,400 per megawatt times 5. That escalates on year 3. The total for that is $352,000. On year 35, it's $2,728 for that year. The overall impact for our scenario 2, which includes the siting agreement, is $391,900 over the 35 years.
That's annual?
No, that is the revenue over 35 years. So a little over $10,000 a year on average.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Woodward?
Mr. Diamond, if you could enlighten me on the relationship with Dominion Power.
I don't think.
Well, let me explain it a little better.
Yeah.
You mentioned Dominion in here several times in the shared program.
Yeah.
Are they going to be the owners of the project and develop the project, or?
No, so this is a privately owned project, and the state set rules for the shared solar program. Those rules require Dominion to allow currently 150 megawatts of shared solar. I'll put it this way. We create competition, and without the state putting this program in place, I don't think that Dominion would choose to create competition against themselves. So Dominion, we have a good working relationship, but they definitely did not choose shared solar to be a competition to their revenue stream.
Okay. But they will not be involved with developing the property.
Correct, yep. Okay. So a private company will be the developer, who's leasing the land, that will build it, we'll maintain it, we'll order the materials, all of that
Okay.
will be owned and operated by the private company.
Okay, but, I mean, that's what I was asking. So somewhere along the way, y'all will sell the project, or maybe there's another term you use to lease the project or whatever, to somebody that will develop it. It won't be your company personally developing it.
That's not necessarily true. So New Energy Equity is an elite company. Elite actually owns Minnesota Power as a separate branch. And so Minnesota Power is northern Minnesota's power producer. The other major power producer in Minnesota is Xcel, who's another very large producer. So Minnesota Power is much smaller, more along the lines of Appalachia Power, so they certainly have a decent size to them, but they're not anywhere near the extent of some of the largest in the nation. So they do intend to develop, build, and retain some of these projects. I can say that the first project that we are going to be doing in the state, we will be working with a separate company as the owner-operator, and so we will be selling that first project to another company. But I can't say. I do know that there's plans for us to retain projects, but there also is just as likelihood of us selling it to another private company.
Okay, all right, if I could follow up.
Yes.
with you. Do you folks have to go through PJM? I believe that's a proper company.
We do not.
Okay, so to hook into the lines, you don't have to deal with getting a permitting from PJM?
Correct. I believe that's because they go into the transmission lines, and those are regional.
You're doing
Because
distribution.
we're going directly into the distribution network, and that's where it stays. I believe that we get to, we don't need to do that process.
Yeah, and so that's why you're going into three-phase lines?
Correct.
First, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Quarles?
Mr. Diamond, during the construction phase of this operation, is it structured where you've broken it into phases, where you're doing your construction, removing trees, disturbing the land? And if that's so, have you discussed or thought about the amount of runoff or sediment ponds that would be needed to facilitate this in relation to the creek that's already existing going through the property?
Right. So the tree removal in the area, the grubbing of the trees, and then planting of a base to allow, and then allowing it to germinate and grow a bit generally is a good practice that we follow. And so there's generally, if you want to describe them as different phases, there's generally a clean up the site and then let it settle and establish with some, like a base layer. And then we generally come back with a tracked, it's like a pylon driver. It drives the post in the ground for the base, and then we attach, in this case, it's a fixed tilt system to that. The disturbance to the ground generally is pretty minimal. Because we're only 20 acres, certainly we will do some modification to the ground. We have to allow for sediment control to meet DEQ's requirements, but we definitely have less of an impact because of just the sheer size of us. So the general impact is less than a larger scale project, but anytime you're disturbing an acre of ground, there is the potential. And so we do have to be conscious of general good practices on how we build it.
Thank you.
Mr. Diamond, I had a handful of items here between you and Mr. Eglin. To begin with, though, I just want to clarify one more thing on shared solar, just to make sure it's abundantly clear. So you are connecting to the local distribution system. And the local distribution system exists now. You're not connecting to individual people. So this is my understanding, when you put power in a local distribution system, it goes into the system, not directed to anybody. So the idea that that you have people locally in the community that benefit from this is entirely a financial agreement that's made that essentially, I've been trying to remember, I can't remember the name of the program that had been going on 10, 15 years ago, where we allowed competition and people were able to buy power from other localities. And essentially, it's what it really amounts to is you're selling the power to the power company, and through some agreement, it's just a financial arrangement that people are able to buy power from you, part of it, instead of from the power company.
1 second.
Yeah.
The smoke's getting to me.
That's okay.
Absolutely. So the difference is talking about where the power physically goes and how the power is calculated and used theoretically and through a financial system. So the power physically goes directly into the distribution network, and just like water, power runs downhill. And so the power is going to go this way or that way down the line, and whoever is downstream from where the power connects is going to physically get the power from that facility when it's producing. Theoretically and financially,
Go ahead.
then we're getting into the amount of power that we put in and we produce is metered, and then we're allowed to sell credits to the same amount of power that we produce at a different geographical area. Louisa County and the surrounding counties are the counties that could benefit from this.
So my understanding is what would happen is that we have 5 megawatts. So you're going to sell 5 megawatts to the distribution system. In this case, I believe you'd be selling to largely Dominion.
Yeah,
And-
it will
and-
all stay within Dominion.
Yeah. So what you would have to do then is you would have to have a subscription system where you would go out to customers within an area that you want to serve, shall we say, and say, if you want to buy part of your power from us or all of your power, whatever, you can subscribe, just like we did with the open competition some years ago where you could buy power from Minnesota or California or whatever. And then it becomes simply Dominion, and you all are simply calculating the bill that the person is paying against the, they're essentially apportioning the cost. So yes, they would get cheaper power, but it's, once the power is connected to the grid, electrons don't have color to them that you can identify this one's going there or there or whatever.
Right.
Load goes where load's demanded.
Yep.
So it's really a financial system of subscription and payment that way. So I think sometimes it's a little unclear when you say that we're serving the local neighborhood. Well, you're serving whoever subscribes to you.
Sure.
If you offer your subscription in the local neighborhood, then, and people do subscribe, then that's fine. But if you have 5 megawatts, my guess is you all are going to attempt to subscribe people locally if possible. And if you don't get enough, you're going to be subscribing people wherever you can to get that paid for.
Yeah,
So
and
we might well, if people don't want to subscribe locally, we might be serving people in Illinois or Florida or wherever, depending on where the subscription has to go.
And we're only allowed to subscribe people within the county and in any adjacent county. So it could go
Okay.
to an adjacent county, but it couldn't go to 2 counties over.
Okay.
And the bill works, so one of the frustrations with certain programs is that you get 2 different bills, and that is frustrating and confusing. And so we're working with a company that Dominion sends their bill to that company then calculates out. And if you use 10 units of power and you subscribe to 9, you'd pay 9 at the rate that you subscribe to and 1 at Dominion's rate, and it would all come on one bill. So that is one thing that certain programs don't have, and that is definitely it's just more work for people, so I'm happy that they have that in this state.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I don't think that's really what everyone understands when they hear, so.
Okay.
But thank you for that. Mr. Eglin, item 5 in your conditions, there's a scrivener's error there, I believe, for minimum height of the fence. It says 8 in verbiage, but in 6 is the number given there, so I'm not sure if it's 8 or 6.
It should be 6.
It should be 6, so it's a 6-foot fence. Okay. Item 10, this is, Mr. Diamond, this would be for you. So in item 10, it says that removal of vegetation requires prior approval from the zoning, well, let's see, let me step further. Criteria for removal shall only involve trees threatening the project, the property, or neighboring property, or when trees grow to a height greater than 35 feet and impacts a project's energy output. Do you all calculate or evaluate the height of the trees and the shading beforehand?
Yes.
So why would you expect to have an impact at a later time when the trees grow?
Between the setback that we've placed from the trees of 20 feet and the height that these trees are supposed to grow, I don't believe that there will be an impact. And that is why we're 20 feet back on the sides where shading would come into place. A lot of times these are written so that there's always the what if. Any contract could be 5 pages, but is now 30 pages because there's always the what ifs. But I don't believe that there will be any impact because loblolly trees do have a height maximum and whatnot. I do have my engineer here. If you'd like him to give an answer as far as setbacks and shading, he might be able to answer it just a little bit better.
I don't know if I need that. I'm just
Okay.
observing the fact that the way this is written, you know, you could fill this property, get what you need for megawatts, and as the trees grow, you could cut a lot of trees down. Because it says that you're saying that you're allowed to do that if it impacts the energy output. So if it's, you know, I mean, it's possible to do that and impact the buffering.
So if it's a concern, I would recommend that we could bring language back that would clarify that better. Maybe set a maximum distance from the array, or I just want an engineer to chime in on what a maximum distance is, and maybe the maximum distance is already what we have, but without verifying and running it by somebody that is an expert in that, I would want to verify. But I'm happy to bring that back and.
Well, I was kind of hoping you all had done that in the engineering ahead of time, so you'd know how much you would need. But, okay. We'll move on here. Mr. Eglin, under item 12, decommissioning A1, we're back to the things underground, and maybe I didn't read it right again, but I know we're still trying to get this stuff that breaks off. The last sentence in that says structural members that break off 3 feet or more underground shall be abandoned in place. Well, if it breaks off when I'm pulling it, can I abandon it in place without pulling it out? I guess I'd need to know it broke off 3 feet or more. I think what you're trying to say is structures that break off 3 feet or more underground, the remaining part more than 3 feet underground can remain in place.
Correct.
That's, yeah. I know we keep talking about this and
I think this is the
keep
language we settled on previously.
we keep trying, yeah.
So,
To me, it's kind of clear.
structural members that break off more than 3 feet shall remain abandoned in place, basically. So structural members that break off more than 3 feet underground shall be abandoned in place is what it should read.
Well, it seems to me like what it should read is the remaining portion below 3 feet of structural members that break off can remain in place. And that's not quite worded right, but it's, what you're trying to say is anything that's 3 feet or more in the ground, when it breaks off, can stay.
Correct.
But, you know, if it breaks off, you don't want to just, well, it broke off, 4 feet in the ground, and we'll leave the whole thing there. I'm not sure you'd know, but it's just, I don't know.
I think the only way to know is if you're using the same height of, now, as opposed to just tamping the post in the ground, the new technology is actually has a screw on the bottom of it, so they can actually screw them in. So if all of them are going to be the same height, and you pull one out and it breaks off, then you might actually know if they measure it. So it may be possible to actually know when you pull them out 35 years from now if you're using the same pole every time.
Well, I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking that one. If I am, I apologize, but it just struck me again.
I'd be happy to work with the Director of Community Development to come up with something that going forward that, or if we need to continue to tweak it, we can.
If I'm the only one here, we don't need to go there. Am I the only one that?
You brought up a.
Well, we can, that's all right, I was just gonna say, we can.
Thought in my mind, if we leave this metal in the ground, what's it gonna do for that? We just finished talking about water sources and all that. If something breaks off and we just leave it in the ground, what's that gonna do for the water in the ground eventually? We're supposed to be leaving that ground in pristine condition, right?
So the purpose of the decommissioning bond and the decommissioning part of the solar ordinance is to bring the property back to an agricultural use after the 35 years is ended. We only have one project out of all the projects approved that have a ground monitoring well requirement. That is something that can be done if we're concerned about water quality 35 years from now. The Adidia Energex project is the one that has to do annual groundwater testing. But it is to actually answer whether it's built, whether the pole is made out of galvanized steel or something else, we'd have to talk to an engineer to find out if the pole was left in the ground, what kind of chemicals over the course of the life of that pole degrading in the ground, what would that cause damage to the environment or not. We'd have to talk to an engineer.
Mr. Eglin, item 18, we've talked about this before, and this is old language, and I raised a question before, and it seems to keep coming back. The particular phrase in here, we're talking about obtaining building permits. It says that permits must be obtained within 5 years, date of approval of this CUP, and this is the phrase that bothers me, and the generation of solar electricity shall reach a maximum phase of 5 megawatts AC within 3 years, and it continues on. The word phase there, to me, is completely nonsensical. I believe we're trying to reach a maximum output.
Okay.
I don't, we either want to get to a certain phase of the project or reach an electrical output, but a maximum phase of 5 megawatts, it makes no sense.
I believe output would be the better word.
Yeah, and so it keeps coming back, but good. Item 19, soil stabilization, and this kind of goes to one of Mr. Quarles' concerns. So this particular set of discussion is generally for the larger solar fields that we do. So the phasing is done in 100-acre pieces for construction to deal with erosion. Obviously, this is a very small field. And so there's not going to be but one phase if it's 100 acres in a phase. So I guess the only question is, do we need to have it broken down anymore, or since it is such a small field, does it even matter? But
I can shine a little light on condition 19. I believe it was, again, Adidia, the one I brought up a moment ago about the monitoring well, was around 80 or 90 acres, which is under the 100-acre phasing requirement we have in the ordinance. And so there was that balance of, well, you can't create a phasing map for 100-acre chunks if your project's under 100 acres. So the negotiating tactic between staff and the applicant was to come up with a phasing narrative. So that's where 19 has come from, is to try to break down what is already required by the Department of Environmental Quality for erosion and sediment control and stormwater for phasing that out and detailing it out as part of that process, so that we have an understanding. They're not just going to go in there and clear everything down to the ground. They're going to go in there and put up silt fence and stabilize, put in the roads and access, and get everything prepped before they actually pull out trees, grub, and clear the land, and then put pile drives in. So could you pull out condition 19 and just rely on what's required by the erosion and sediment control and stormwater regulations by the state of Virginia? Yes. There is more of a comfort level to kind of write it out in the conditions, so that if you're a project under 100 acres, that the applicant is aware that the thought has to be put into making sure that you are doing everything in your power to not cause a sediment release.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure we thought through that, since it's a smaller field. You know. Good. And the last thing, item 28, waste disposal. The first statement on there, any solids or hazardous waste carried onto the site during construction, operation, or decommissioning. Now, I have a whole different operational view of things with regarding carrying hazardous waste onto a site. To me, we create hazardous waste and have to carry it off the site. So I'm just, what are we planning on hauling onto this site?
So diesel fuel, typically you have a large tank on site to fill all the equipment with, perhaps hydraulic fluid, things of that nature were the thought. This is a really old condition that's been added on, I think, once many, many years ago.
Packaging materials.
Yeah, package, start.
Okay, I don't view those, though, in from my history
That's
in the
solids.
industry.
Packaging material would be solids.
Agreed. From my history, though, industrial history, we don't view that as waste until after it's, you've got to deal with it, getting rid of it. But anyway, go ahead. I see where you're going with it. Yeah. All right.
Condition 28 has become very long over the years. It could probably be shortened if you'd like to direct staff to perhaps shorten that for the next one.
No, it's fine. I just want to make sure I had a clear understanding of what you all were thinking of with hazardous waste, but that's fine.
And the last sentence on condition 18 is that the last sentence where solar panels supporting the project cannot be disposed of in Louisa County landfill. They believe that conditions about half of the projects. That's a relatively new sentence in that condition over the last 2 years.
All right, so just so we don't walk away without finishing up on existing vegetation, it does say that the vegetation removal requires prior approval from zoning administrator. Do we feel like the zoning administrator is going to exercise sufficient judgment on how much we can cut out for buffering and that sort of thing? I mean, I'm just...
I'd like to defer that question to the current zoning administrator.
Help me get a good solid feeling that we're covered all around.
I mean, you look like you really want that. Okay, all right, so, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna exercise professional judgment and make an evaluation of what is substantial, and if it's a substantial removal, then it's not appropriate. Can establish criteria, but it's somewhat subjective area based on professional opinion and evaluation.
All right.
Yep.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Goodwin.
while we have Mr. Gillespie up there, or Tom, we've got a statement in here that says replacement vegetation requirement will apply to if an existing tree dies or becomes diseased and there is a resulting gap. Why couldn't we say if it dies, becomes diseased, or is otherwise necessary to be removed? And then we've got a replacement program in place for you to use if he has to take out vegetation. It'll do it if it dies or it's diseased. So if it's cutting down on output, why couldn't we include that in there? Because now we could be creating a gap in the buffer.
Right, so I understand what you're saying. So you're saying basically an understory material would go in place of the material that was removed because of the
That
canopy.
or replacement planting.
Right. I mean, I would hope that I or my successor would look at any gaps that are created. And again, realize that in the example of the green wall, of the monoculture, of a Leland cypress or arbor vitae or loblolly pines, loblollies, of course, have a crown. And so, I mean, a lot of what's underneath is not really screening anyway, okay? I mean, because they're competing for canopy. So I would hope that they're going to look at it, because at that point, you're looking at a specimen by specimen perspective, right? You're talking about one tree, one specimen. So it may be that a holly tree, okay, a yaupon holly or some sort of a native material is the most appropriate species to go in there. None of the above, no loblolly, no arbor vitae or anything else. So, that becomes a very site-specific judgment and evaluation that's going to have to be made. And I agree. I mean, but that's like when we look at things at a commercial site, and we're going to bring our judgment to bear and try to guide people towards what we think is maybe not in the code, but in the spirit of the code.
Okay. Chair, this might be a good time to bring up a topic that I've been working with on staff, since we're talking about vegetation. I've never been happy with the approach we've taken over the past years of recommending Leland cypress and arborvitae, because they're not particularly viable in this climate. They don't have a good lifespan. And now it seems we're moving towards terms like supplemental planting, and in the application it says intermittent as needed, which to me is nondescript. I don't know what that means. So I put something together, and I'd like to share it. It would be a subsection under number 11, condition number 11. It goes like this: the applicant shall submit a detailed buffer vegetation plan prepared by a licensed landscape designer or arborist when the site plan is submitted. The vegetation plan shall demonstrate aesthetics, year-round maximum reduction of project visibility from neighboring properties and public byways, and viability over the life of the conditional use permit. The vegetation plan is subject to the approval of the zoning administrator. I understand it's been shared with the applicant, and he has no problems with it, or indicated he's okay.
That's correct.
And I'd just like to get us out of the business of pretending like we know anything about trees. I mean, we know one when we see it, but the owner swear he's gonna be using an arborist to plant these things anyway, or a landscaper. So, already under contract, so let them do it and submit something to us. And I just think it's a heck of a lot better than supplemental or intermittent as needed. So I propose that as a additional condition, sub-condition under number 11.
All right, so that doesn't replace anything, it's just an additional condition under 11.
I will leave that up to staff. If it actually should replace something else, it'll be an additional, but I want those words, I would recommend to the commission that those words go in there, and we get out of this business of arguing about whether or not we're gonna put 4 or 5 trees in and what they're gonna be.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Goodwin's language, which we've recently received and not had a chance to talk about some of the specific words, I would suggest respectfully that licensed be changed to certified. Professions that are licensed by the state of Virginia include landscape architect. Landscape designer is not a licensed profession. And arborists and horticulturalists are certified by their professions and industries, but not by the state of Virginia. So I would suggest certified or licensed as appropriate, maybe, to cover both terms.
Okay, it's
I will
fine,
tell you, there are a
fine.
lot of folks who call themselves landscape designers, and, I'm not sure what we're necessarily going to get out of that person. They're not a licensed professional. No disrespect to anybody who practices as a landscape designer, but it's not a licensed profession.
I'm perfectly fine with going with certified or licensed, but I don't want my next door neighbor to put it together for me.
Would be the correct professional, a landscape designer or a landscape architect? I'm just asking the question because I don't know.
I'm not sure there's a difference between a designer and an architect.
There is. One's licensed and one's certified.
About $125 an hour.
Yeah, there you go. But, so there's training, there's liability, there's a handful of different things that make the difference between them. I don't know.
Again, to your point, to Mr. Goodwin's point about dealing with things at a tree-by-tree specimen level, I mean, I'd really almost at that point rather be talking to an arborist within the context of the arboreta that they're working with. So, a landscape architect is always a valuable professional, but when we're looking at arborist or some version of a wood stand, landscape architect is, in some degrees, looking at things at a different scale.
Are you suggesting that we just say a licensed arborist?
A certified arborist.
Certified arborist?
Right.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Just
Again,
somebody
if
that
we're-
knows what they're doing, and we're not.
I mean, I would say that either of those professions are qualified to work there. There may be places where we're talking about a dozen trees, if there's been some sort of, pine borer disease. There's a whole other issue that we've not talked about is viability of trees in stands. Again, pine borer is a real issue, and, the red tips had blight. Everybody loved red tips 30 years ago, and then it was Bradford pears and all the other things. And once they get blighted, when they're planted all together, there's potentially a mass issue
I
that you have
just
to
know
deal
that
with.
arborvitae and Lieber and cypress do not have a good track record in this climate. I'm all right with certified arborist. I just want somebody who knows what they're doing and not us sitting up here arguing about 2 rows, 3 rows, what kind and all that stuff.
Yeah, I would include both of those.
All right.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Quarles, you had a,
It's just, is Mr. Diamond agreeable to these changes?
Yes.
Understand.
that would be item 11E. I think. Any other questions, comments?
Well,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Goodwin.
I think it kind of replaces 11A, which talks about staggered rows of evergreens and all that stuff.
Well, I was asking the question before.
I said I'll leave it up to staff to whether or not it's a new paragraph or an old one, but when I look at it, we definitely don't need A or most of A if we put this in place.
So if I may, Chairman, the second paragraph of A is directly from the ordinance, which is in the emergency case that a tornado or fire came through, the applicant at a minimum is responsible for putting in 4 staggered rows immediately. Nothing stopping them from putting back 300 feet, especially if it's required as part of the condition. So if the concept plan says it's 300 feet, they're going to have to bring 300 feet back. That's basically the bare minimum. So that paragraph's directly from the ordinance. The first paragraph for A, where we start with supplemental plantings will be required. That's just more of a diving into the concept plan and referencing it as part of that condition.
So what would be the proper thing to do here? from your perspective, Mr. Eglin?
My suggestion would be is to actually add as a third paragraph under 11A, so that you have, we're referencing the concept plan and the supplemental vegetation is required, then we go into what the bare minimum of the ordinance is, and then regardless of what happens, you either have a certified or licensed arborist, make sure that there is proper amount of screening. You could technically take out the supplemental planning because it is already in the ordinance, so we can always look back to the ordinance if we need to. Either add it in as a third paragraph, remove the second paragraph and make this one the second paragraph. There's a couple different options here.
I'm okay with leaving it up to staff, how you deal. I'd like to see us go this route.
Is that something you all could adjust prior to going to the board?
We'd be happy to.
Very good. We'll give you that option.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dickerson?
Question for Mr. Diamond. Last month, we had that great presentation from the Louisa Fluvanna Housing Foundation, and since this electricity will be at a lower rate than the other Dominion electricity, is there a plan to help our disadvantaged residents receive some of this benefit?
Yeah, so we are required to do 30% to low and moderate income as part of the program. That's written into the program, and so we have committed to, at a minimum, meeting that. And that, I believe, is also stated in an exhibit. As far as specific locations, I will reach out to staff and gather some information, and then my coworker who is responsible for that, I will pass that information off to them and have them reach out to that group as a lead and opportunity to help us meet or exceed that goal.
Great, because y'all have been really good through the pre-application process, the community meeting, and even tonight, adjusting the things as they come up. So I want to commend you for that.
Thank you.
And I just would like to see some Louisa County residents benefit from that 30%, if at all possible.
Yeah, personally, I do too. And so I will make an effort myself to do that. I will reach out to Tom and gather some information on that and then pass that to my coworker.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman. Mr.
Jarvis.
Diamond, from the edge of the property, what's the line of sight between that and Lake Anna Airport? Because that's right on the final to that airport. I'm just wondering what the distance is.
I don't recall that
No.
distance, but we did run a FAA study for glare and for hazard, and that was found, there was no hazard found.
Right, I read the reports.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Jarvis, you said Lake Anna Airport?
Yes, sir, Lake Anna. That's that little private one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's-
this is in Gordonsville.
Well, if you look at the study, though, it's right going actually to the Bumpus, which is Lake, we call it Lake Anna, 7 Whiskey 4.
Right, this is at the northwest corner of Louisa County at Gordonsville. That's what I'm saying. This is,
Well, then the FAA studies are wrong.
they may be. Did we, because the last month or 2 months ago, when we looked at the solar field that was adjacent to Lake Anna Airport,
FAA had no problem.
the FAA had no problem. Do we include the wrong ones here?
If you'll flip to page 262 of your staff packet, you'll see the FAA no hazard determination for the Ochs project at Gordonsville, Virginia, with the longitude and latitude. I'd have to plug that into Google to double check, but it's not referencing Horse Pen Branch or Clenera, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just trying to.
I'm looking at the actual map that was provided.
What page are you on?
Well, it's that, since I got it scattered from one end of town. About page 180, I think. 265.
Your package report?
Yeah, it's Gordonsville Airport, I misspoke.
Yes. Yes, Gordonsville, that's what I wanted to clarify, because you're right, Gordonsville Airport, yeah.
Because the owner of Lake Anna came in with the other project, and he didn't have any issue. So I was just curious, based on the map, what the distance was.
It's on final, it's a good ways out,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I was just testing his knowledge. It wasn't that I necessarily had an issue. How well do you really know your packet? I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right, then, the conference going on. I guess at this point, we'd be looking for a motion then. Two motions, actually.
First motion would be that CUP 2023-02 is in accordance with the comprehensive plan. And the second motion would be, we recommend to the Board of Supervisors the adoption of CUP 2023-02 with the 32 staff conditions, with changes on page 14 from 20 megawatts to 5 megawatts. And changes on page 15 to a 6-foot fence. Changes to page 19 to output. Include the proposed buffer exemptions of 170 feet and 220 feet, with the addition of condition 11A, the third paragraph, as proposed by Commissioner Goodwin and tweaked by staff. I think I caught all the changes, but I am happy to be correct.
I think you did. You've got two motions, so let's take the first one first. So do we have a second on the first motion? Motion is say, any commentary on, or further discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Rogers? All right, so second motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Yes. No.
Mr. Rogers, we have two noes. Yes. You were a yes on the first and a no on the second?
Well, the ordinance, I think, was okay. And my concern about this project is I can't see where the people are gaining anything out of this. It's just, they're not reducing their electric bill, it's just all going back into the system, and I can't see it.
Okay. Well, thank you. So that motion, both motions pass on that, and we'll move on to the second item, which is LDR 2023-03, animal amendment. Mr. Gillespie.
And members of the commission, bear with me while I bring up the language. All right. So before you this evening is a proposed amendment to the county code, and for convention, we have given it a LDR 2023 code. And as you all remember, LDR stands for Land Development Regulations. This is very much not in the Land Development Regulations section of the county code. But for our filing purposes and tracking purposes, that's why it's being referred to as LDR 2023-03, the third code amendment we processed this year. Mr. Woodward called me earlier this week and just indicated, and I had totally missed this, that the memorandum that went out as a cover was addressed to one of my predecessors, not even my immediate predecessor. So Linda did a nice job basically taking the language that was given to us and putting it into that standard format that's used for code amendments. But unfortunately, she pulled an old memo off referring to Allison Fincham. So there's a short introductory cover. As she says in that, this was brought forward as an item referred by the board, first went to the Agricultural, Forestry, and Rural Preservation Committee. They met on April 26th. They meet intermittently, so basically as they have business and as they're called. There was some discussion in the work session earlier about there being split opinion within the committee. They held a hearing as well, and also that there was a vote within that committee whether to support or not support the amendment as it was proposed. I will just note they have not met again, and so their proceedings are not official. They've not adopted their minutes. So, I'll just report it as it was reported to us. Split opinion on the code language that, or the idea that's been brought to you in code language. The specific code language would be to Chapter 14, which is to add a new Article 5 for livestock and poultry. And there was discussion in the work session earlier about what the state code does now, how it's enforced both by private parties against each other as well as by others. And what this would do would be to add this new section and specifically relate to livestock and poultry. And then, the violation of this would be a violation of county code, which could be enforced by the county as a code offense. Mr. Eldridge, Assistant County Attorney's here. He spoke to, his role prosecuting civil cases for the county, and he can speak more about that. But basically, this is following the authority given by the state. There was also some discussion about the language in Part E about what this was not intended to do or what it was not intended to be addressing, which is commercial farmers, and some of the language there is not really regulatory, but is more of a preface or a purpose and intent type statement. The language, let's see. There may be one speaker here for that. I don't believe anybody's put their name on a contact or on a sign-up card. But if you'd like me to put the language on the screen, we can arrange that. Otherwise, it's packet page 327.
All right.
All right, and we have no further comment on this.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move directly to the public hearing on this so we can move through that and come back. So I'm going to open the public hearing. Public hearing time is open. There is no applicant, so we'll move directly to comments from the public. If anyone here would like to speak to this, please come to the microphone. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. State your name and voting location. Would anyone like to speak? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public address period on this. And we'll be back to the commission to talk about this. We had a lengthy discussion earlier, so
To the chase.
cut to the chase is a good thing unless we want to continue.
Mr. Chairman, would we defer this? Because I believe there are other options that we have to deal with it that are better than this approach. And I have some ideas. I would like to work with the county attorney and with representatives from Ag and Forest All District and anyone else on this commission that would like to take part in that are welcome to join in. But I've done some research on this, and I think there is another opening.
All right. So just to say, we're not required to take a vote on this tonight. I mean, we don't have to. But Mr. Eldridge, just to verify, if we're going to defer this, would we need to vote or simply say we're going to defer this? Vote to defer. Very good. Just wanted to clarify that.
Second.
So I believe we have a motion in the form of Mr. Goodwin to defer. Is that correct?
And a
So
second,
we
I
have a
heard.
motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of deferring this for further work, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good, we'll defer that. All right, and as a further follow-up, would anyone like to serve with Mr. Goodwin? Doesn't have to be official, but if you like to.
I'll work with you. I'm not raising my hand to do anything. but-
I'd be happy to work.
No,
I didn't say can anyone work with Mr. Goodwin, I said would anyone like to?
All I was saying, yeah, I think Ellis jumped right in there, is whatever you come up with, maybe send it around to us to see before we get back here next month.
As long as we don't start playing comments back and forth, because wouldn't that justify an illegal meeting? Send things out to people
it
and
would-
start getting yes, we can't, I can't do that.
Yeah, you'll have to bring it back, which is fine,
Right.
so.
Well, just send it to me then.
Gordon, if you'd rather work with
No,
George
no,
on it, then
no, I was right.
I can step back.
All I'm asking for, I'd like to know what direction y'all are heading at some point.
All right, yeah, Mr. Quarles, thank you for that.
Can't do that, and I won't know if he'll get back
So-
here next month.
I just have one more comment on this, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's out of place, I don't know, but what struck me when I read this is one of the first signs that we're failing in the number one goal of the comprehensive plan. We are losing the rural character of the county when we start to go down paths like this. Not to say that there aren't problems that need to be resolved, but it seems to me like the character of the county is changing significantly. Anyhow, all right, so I didn't have any items for new business or discussion, but Mr. Gillespie often has a report for us, so I'm going to call on him.
I do, thank you. I will keep my remarks brief. Basically, we have I always start with, my 5 Ps, right? People, places, policies, process, and projects. So on the people side, we have 1 remaining spot open in the department, and that's a very critical spot for us. That's our front-end permit technician, so building permit technician. And of course, they help with everybody. They help everybody with all kinds of projects, so they help with everything, I guess is what I was going to say. We had an offer 5 days before the person was going to start, found something different to do, and so left us with an unfilled spot, and we're doing an interview tomorrow. Hopefully it's a successful second interview with our preferred candidate, and we may or may not be making an offer. So that would fill that spot, which would be great for us. I will say I've been here just over a year, and we have had any changes structurally in what we're doing with some of our programs. And in spite of all of that, with essentially 1 3/4 people we've been running, full-time people, we've been running the permit counter. So they do a great job, and it's important that we get a full-time person in there. Mr. Rogers, he has like every style of hat you can wear, a tricorn hat, a baseball cap, permit technician cap. So he wears the permit technician cap pretty often right now, and we need him doing some other things and duties in his role. So that's an important one for us to fill. On the, I think.
Bear in mind that when you take a hat off, your pay is reduced. So just so you know.
I didn't tell you what we were paying in. I didn't say it was legal tender. The only other thing I'd add is, on the process side, we have been working through working group. We started last year. You all started, the board and the commission started for something that's very important for the county. That's a policy setting a document. That's through your plan, your comprehensive plan, and future land use. But we had to kind of come to a stop on that for a few reasons. We just weren't getting some of the inputs that we needed. So we've been getting some more on that. That is not the ideal process that we would have wanted to undertake as we started that last summer. But in other news, and this is a process issue that I wanted to ask you all about, and I've spoken with a couple. Tonight was a good example of a large, complex case report. We've added a little bit of new information in there. I hope you all saw the economic viability section that was in there. There was no question or comment on it, but it's in the report now, so it's a perennial. It will be there. We'll make some other small changes in the reports, but in a big change, as we start to deploy digital devices and you're carrying that material around digitally and accessing it digitally, Mr. Barlow had asked that we put up the county code on the screen, and it may not be the best time of evening to do that tonight, so I'd suggest we do that at a future work session meeting. But we'll pull up MuniCode and sort of what we do on a regular basis as we help people look for things. It's a very useful resource. But I would also say on the computer side, it's going to be a different world as you start to use the electronic documents, and then you start thinking, I really would like to flip through XYZ material. And so we have been producing paper packets for a while, and most of you get your material that way. A 400-page paper packet is basically a ream of paper. I do double side. We don't do toner save, but I mean, we do what we can to try to make that less of a production. But it's a large undertaking to, for these folks that have produced this material, but for us to print it and produce it as well. I would like to ask, as you go through exhibits A through J, if there's a glint and glare study or a cultural resources report or something else that you would prefer to see in an executive summary format, where we have, here's the executive summary of the different components. If that's something we can require of applicants, that would be great. They can tell you what they feel is important about the glint and glare study, and then we can either put that deeper into the packet or remove it from the packet. I don't know what usefulness you all, I guess at this point I'm soliciting some feedback on how useful you think some of the detailed reports are. Cultural resources, glint and glare, obviously the visual analysis I think is always going to be critical, and there's no way to summarize that and just say, trust us, the visuals look good, you need to see those. But there are a lot of other materials that go in there that you may not necessarily want to have the full consultant's specialty report on. So I would just ask if you want to tell me outside of this meeting, or if you want to have a conversation about it at this meeting or another meeting, it's important that we do that because there's a service to the public that they can get to this material and access it and understand it. And it is pretty dense. So I come to you asking for some guidance on a policy for the packets we put together, especially for solar projects. Mr. Jarvis.
So one of the things that I felt was useful, but it needs some refinement, was the fact that the applicant had drone footage.
Okay.
For some of us that don't go out on these sites, getting that pictorial from the
Okay.
bird's eye view and then bringing the drone down to the vegetation, for me personally, was
I tell you, my toes kind of curled under when I saw how close he was to the power line a couple times, but yeah, very good.
yeah, so I just, because a picture's worth 1,000 words, and maybe we don't need as much of the other stuff if you.
No, I would, I'd like to go back and look at it based on what you just said and get back to you on.
Okay.
I just as soon see the executive summary up front, and I don't need to see all these exhibits.
Right.
I'd like to look at it closer before I respond to that.
No, and I respect that, and I'll just say, I actually looked at the packet with an eye to cut out some exhibits, or, we've redacted some material in the past. Tom, I think it's some of the environmental material we've cut in the past when it's just, I don't remember what we cut out of Turkey. It was some of the environmental, wasn't it?
You don't often get an environmental phase 1 report, but typically those have a pretty good executive summary, and they can be about 150 pages. So typically an environmental phase 1 report, if we get one, is redacted. Glint and glare studies is usually redacted because the majority of that is technical data. But for the most part, we keep a majority of your cultural and your other stuff because it's usually a pretty good read.
Yeah. So, with an eye to do that this month, I couldn't find something I wanted to cut out. And so I just left it all in there.
I can probably let you know what I don't need to see.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a handful of things. I looked through them all, but there are a handful of things to realize. I just don't need to
Almost
look at
every
that.
solar application, there's stuff, so man, I'm just flipping through this. I don't
Yeah.
need to see this.
Yep. And I know Mr. Barlow likes to use the markup tools and kind of take some notes and come back to things like Alex Stanley was showing earlier, where you can flag things or star things. You know, the other thing that's great about a digital document is you can hit Control F for find, and you can look for a term like hazardous or glare or buffer, screen, opaque. You know, you can look, you can do search terms, and so if it's all in there, it's a lot easier to access that material. So just a reminder.
I may have missed it. When are you planning on rolling that out for real?
Next month.
Next month, so we'll get next month's package in this.
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So as of
When, as late as we're getting it now, which is
a few.
Friday or Monday?
No, I would like to always be 1 week ahead. I mean, that's normal to get it to you before the weekend, but Thursday is ideal, Thursday to Thursday. If, for example, the group that gets together to talk about the livestock at large, if you come up with some, you know, individually, you have some ideas about what a final version would be, we can send that out with a working agenda 2 weeks in advance, if we have something like that. But unfortunately, with some of this material, we tell everybody, you know, Thursday's the day that we're going to send it out and be done. But we have to wrap it up, and publishing it on the system we have been using involves, you know, it takes a couple hours to
Means between now and July,
Yes,
you gotta get us those laptops,
correct. So,
and you gotta train us on using them.
so.
Are you gonna do,
Yes.
are you gonna do a dual thing on
Yes.
July? You're gonna give
No.
us paper and,
No,
we got a lot to do, and I'm on vacation starting on the 1st of July, so you're 2 weeks, you gotta get me spun up and
So you
ready to
have-
go.
right. So here's some choices, okay? Here's some thoughts.
Just spun up already.
Yep, here's some thoughts. So the devices are in-house. There are some settings that are being set up right now. One is to be able to find the thing if it gets lost. So obviously, if you need to call us and let us know to find your.
Somebody throws it out a
Yeah.
window.
Yeah, we can do that. But I thought,
Freedom of information, here, take it. It's free.
you know, we already ask a lot of you all with your work sessions in addition to your regular sessions, and so there's a block of time every month, you know, every 20 days, business days, you all are showing up here. But my thought would be that you have a drop-in 2 weeks before on the 22nd of June, so 2 weeks from now and 2 weeks before your next meeting, and we're here for a couple hours, and we just use this room and use it for training and do a handoff. It's an iPad, so anybody who's handled an iPad before knows what it looks like. It's an iPad. I think your two primary uses are going to be agenda packets, and if anybody wants to use it for email as their primary or secondary email device, that's probably your two main reasons for it. I would say, you know, June 22nd, if anybody has a, you know, likes that, we'll open up the room for a couple hours and have the devices in here and a handoff. If you don't want to do it that way, if you really, you know, want the paper delivery, it'll be about a week before your meeting. So it would be the, next meeting is the 13th, right? 13th. So it would be the 8th that we would be handing the, is that right? The 8th? Yeah,
Josh, I have a
so 6th and 13th, thank you. That's 7 days. Thank you.
Josh,
Yes, sir.
you tell me what these things under the table here for? I feel like I'm teaching driver's ed simulator.
I think that's what it's for.
What are they for? That's what I've been doing. I've been beating the hell out of them tonight. So what you need to start working on them a little bit.
No, what you need to do, they're gonna hook the laptops up to this.
Hey, I can handle
This is how
that.
you charge them.
Probably the way we'll learn. I've been working on it.
I know you have.
Damn, what is this thing for? Ask Gordon, he didn't know.
Can
Works
we
better
get
if you
some,
take your shoes off.
can we get
What y'all get 'em
some
for
padding
Fitzgerald?
for this one? Just
They just showed up, I don't know where to.
I can get some velour booties. I can get him to put on some velour booties.
All right.
So that, I don't have as much for you this month as I would normally have because we are going into summer and there are some projects we've been working on for a while that we're trying to get into the queue.
Very good.
Thank you for what you do.
Any other
you. Thank
questions
you all.
for Mr. Gillespie? Right, then, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Hey, Tom.